Our story starts with a tale about a lone adventurer who ended up breaking all the taboos. We then see a scene of a man ferociously devouring a red minotaur, and in the next moment we notice that his arm was completely broken. However, after devouring the flesh of that minotaur, we see that his arm began to regenerate. The system then announced that the roar skill was acquired along with the battle axe skill. The man roared fiercely as a gigantic aura burst out of his body. Around him, many monsters were watching. It is then revealed in the diary of a certain noble that devouring monsters is considered a taboo in this world. For a human, eating monsters means absorbing their evil essence. The first symptom of this act is a frenzied feeling that cannot be explained with mere words, and it comes accompanied by catastrophic superhuman strength. The second symptom includes severe headaches and nausea, followed by poisoning. After all the creatures attacked the man, he ordered them to get out of his way immediately. Then it was explained that the third symptom was sudden death. The man was captured by the monsters, but with a fierce look in his eyes, he swore revenge on everyone. It was also mentioned that there was another possible outcome of devouring monsters, transforming into a monster oneself after consuming all their evil essence. We then see the man slaughtering monsters and devouring their flesh. While doing so, he gained new abilities: analysis, echolocation, and absorption. Soon after, a giant serpent appeared before him as he was eating the head of a wolf. By devouring the wolf, he gained increased agility and the lightning cloak skill. Activating this cloak, he electrocuted the giant serpent. After defeating it, he killed all the other monsters in front of him, acquiring the skills Poisonous Mist and Web Manipulation. However, after a long period of battle, he became extremely tired and thought that with this much power, he might finally survive. But just when he believed everything was fine, another horde of monsters appeared before him. Determined, he declared that he would definitely return alive. The scene then shifted to Bologna, a frontier city near multiple dungeons. Among them was one known as the Dungeon of Miasma. The air inside this dungeon continuously corrodes the condition of adventurers who enter it, which is why most adventurers hated the place. But our protagonist visited it often. Eventually, people began calling him the Butcher of the Miasma. He arrived before a field of miasma and said that it looked great, and that today would be a profitable day. He had reached the 6th floor of the dungeon. It was explained that the grasses growing within the miasma had the effect of purifying it, and also served as an irreplaceable source of income for him. He reminded himself not to take too much, only what he needed. After collecting, he said that the amount should last him 3 days. Suddenly, he noticed miasma rats nearby. It was explained that many of the monsters in this place used miasma and poison, which was another reason why adventurers disliked the dungeon. However, the protagonist said that such things had no effect on him. He then pushed through the toxic smoke and charged at the rats, killing one. But soon after, 2 more leapt at him, forcing him into a fight with the massive rats. Suddenly someone shouted fireball and flames struck the rats, saving him from being devoured. A group of 3 adventurers appeared beside him. One of them claimed he had missed his shot, while another scolded him for not getting closer before casting. The protagonist recognized their faces from the Adventurers Guild. One of the young men extended his hand, asking if his name was Rode, and mentioned that Rode seemed to be in a pretty rough situation, so he decided to help. Rode, however, did not take the hand. He stood up on his own, though he did thank the adventurer. Still, he pointed out that he would have appreciated a warning before having a fireball hurled at his face. The man replied that shouting fireball was the warning. The large man in the group then noted that the miasma grass colony was really there, and the adventurers remarked how lucky they were to have found it. Rudder, on the other hand, was impressed that they were actually following him to find his collection point. However, one of them insisted that they were just adventurers trying to make a living in a dungeon, and it was only by coincidence that they ran into him and ended up saving him. They then mocked Rude, saying, as expected of the Butcher of the Miasma, he can't even properly thank us. Those 3 adventurers were already prepared to fight Rude, but realizing that the situation was not in his favor, Rude reluctantly apologized and with great anger forced himself to thank them. The scene then shifted to Bologna, to Rude's base of operations, which was a restaurant called Full Belly. At that moment some men were harassing Rude, saying that whenever the butcher of the Miasma entered the restaurant, the food would reek of a terrible stench. One of them added that they were only saying this because Rude was dumb enough not to have noticed it yet. They went on to say that adventurers are supposed to be people with the ability to defeat monsters. Someone like Rude, who only had the pathetic skill of abnormal status nullification, couldn't even be considered a real adventurer. It was then explained what abnormal status nullification was. It was a unique ability, useful in exploring a miasma dungeon, for example. Unfortunately, it wasn't suitable for fighting monsters, which is a vital requirement for adventurers, because he lacked a combat-oriented ability. Rude was not welcomed into any party. That was why he had gained the nickname Butcher of the Miasma, since he was always found in the lower floors of miasma dungeons, scavenging for items. In other words, thanks to his worthless skill, he had become nothing more than a rejected adventurer. Rude reflected bitterly, saying that he was already a grown man, yet he was still fighting life or death battles against filthy rats. Well, those rats weren't exactly normal. But still, later lying in bed depressed, he wondered if he was doomed to spend his entire life as a cursed butcher of the miasma. The scene shifted again to the Adventurers Guild. Rude thought that he needed to find another colony while he still had some money left. But then he noticed a crowd gathered and wondered what was happening since the place was far noisier than usual that day. He approached the receptionist and asked if there were any good requests available. Recognizing him as the butcher of the miasma, she informed him that a new dungeon had just been discovered. Hearing this made Rude very excited, because new dungeons were always filled with treasures and magical items, an incredible opportunity for any adventurer. He immediately understood why so many people were there that day. However, the receptionist had more to say. She mentioned the miasma herbs that he always brought in and told him that from now on their price had dropped significantly. Shocked, Rude desperately asked why they had done that. She explained that the miasma dungeon had never been popular to begin with, and now that everyone's attention was focused on the new dungeon, there would be no demand for the herbs anymore. This left Rude extremely frustrated. She then explained that the new dungeon was located in the Avaliel Mountains, but Rude was not allowed to go there. He demanded to know why, and she told him that the requirement to enter a new dungeon was rank D or higher. Unfortunately, poor Rude was only rank E, which meant he wasn't qualified to enter. This enraged him, and he said he wanted to at least take a look inside the new dungeon, asking if there was any way he could. But the receptionist insisted that rules were rules, and that even if he went he would only end up dying for nothing. Suddenly a blonde man appeared and asked Rude if he really wanted to go that badly. If so, he could join their group as a porter. The scene then shifted to a carriage, where Rude was already traveling with them. The blonde man said it was fortunate that they had found Rude, because they had been searching for someone to carry the materials from the new dungeon, but no one had been willing to help them. Hearing this, Rude stayed silent, thinking that it was probably because all the guild's adventurers were rushing to join the new dungeon expedition, making it difficult to find a porter. The other two members of the group complained, saying that out of everyone, they had to end up with the butcher of the miasma, and wondered if they couldn't have found someone better. The blonde man told them to stop, pointing out that Rude was actually a veteran adventurer. In fact, it was far better to bring someone like him than a complete novice. The blonde man then introduced himself again. His name was Bayer, and he was the leader of the Scarlet Blades. The other two were Sasha and Rick, all three being D-rank adventurers. The protagonist introduced himself as Rude, an adventurer from Hankier, and said it was a pleasure to work with them. Bayer then added that before they entered the dungeon there was something he wanted to know. Bayer asked Rude about his status and if he wouldn't mind showing his guild card. Rude then took out his guild card and handed it over. At that moment the system displayed Rude's status, showing that he was level 7 rank E, human and in normal condition. Not only that, but it also revealed all the abilities he possessed. Bayer was surprised to see that Rude could also use fire magic. Rude admitted that yes, he could, but the power was too low to be effective in battle. Still, it was useful for lighting dark places or for cooking. Bayer smiled and said that was quite handy, so they would be counting on Rude for this mission. They eventually arrived at the dungeon, and everyone was excited as they stood before the gate. The bear announced that this was the new Abelau dungeon. Sasha, thrilled, said it looked like they were the first ones to arrive. Rick was already eager, insisting that they start exploring as quickly as possible. They opened the gate, but to their surprise, the dungeon was already completely packed with people. Some were collecting miasma, others were fighting monsters, and still others were looting treasure chests. Outraged, Sasha shouted that the place was overcrowded with adventurers. Bear remarked that it seemed the first floor had already been thoroughly explored. Rick insisted they needed to push deeper since there would probably be fewer people below. Sasha agreed with him, but Rode objected, pointing out that since this dungeon had just been discovered, it would be wiser to first map the upper layer. Senton sneered, asking if Rode was seriously trying to give advice. Rick mocked him as well, saying that was exactly why Rode was still rank IA. Bayer stepped in, asking the two to stop tormenting Rude, since he hadn't meant any harm. However, Bayer admitted that he agreed with his companions, saying that if they stayed on the first floor they wouldn't get any decent results. They needed to go deeper. So the group descended to the fourth layer. Almost immediately, a wolf attacked. Rick shielded Rude and struck the wolf in the head, telling Rude to stop being afraid of such small fry. Meanwhile, Sasha electrocuted wolves with her magic, and Bayer cut them down effortlessly. Watching the scene, Rude thought to himself that they were all incredibly strong while he couldn't even move properly inside the dungeon. After some time, they managed to finish off all the wolves. Sasha remarked that, in the end, they had been right to advance further, and it was much better without other groups around. Bayer agreed, saying the monsters here weren't too strong, and they had even found some nice treasures. Rick then told Rude to collect materials from the monsters he had helped defeat. But Rude replied that he couldn't gather anything from them since their bodies were too damaged, and the magic stones were probably shattered as well. Rick mocked him, asking, "And what if they aren't? You're just too lazy, butcher of the miasma." Rude grew angry, but he had no choice, so he went to collect anyway. He stopped in front of a wolf's mangled corpse, its guts spilling out and the stench of blood filling the air. He wondered why the damn thing had to be cut up so badly. Activating his fire magic, he thought maybe it would be easier if he burned it a little. Rick noticed and asked if the old man was actually going to burn the monster, and joked if Rudd was planning to eat it. Then Rick admitted that he himself was getting hungry since they had been exploring for quite some time. He even started to think the monsters looked appetizing. Sasha scolded him, calling him disgusting and telling him to stop. She reminded him that it was taboo for adventurers to eat monsters, since consuming them meant absorbing their mana, and no one could predict what might happen to their bodies. Rick laughed it off, saying he was only joking, and that once they got back, he'd use the money they earned to eat something satisfying. But suddenly, they all felt a terrifying presence approaching. When they turned around, they saw a massive red minotaur wielding a huge axe. Rudd panicked, wondering why a rank B monster was appearing here in such a shallow layer. Sasha shouted that there was no way they could defeat it. The group trembled, uncertain of what to do. Bayer then turned to Rode and told him he would use his items, asking Rode to hand over his backpack. He also instructed Rode to pay close attention to the minotaur's movements. Rode nervously asked if Bayer actually had a plan. With a sinister smile, Bayer replied that yes, he did. Then, without warning, he slashed Rode across the back with his sword, dropping him to the ground instantly. Bayer ordered Rick to activate his skill immediately. Rick obeyed, unleashing his warrior's encouragement, a skill that caused its target to draw. Rick's skill drew the attention of all the nearby monsters. He infused that ability into his axe and threw it next to Ruda. Immediately after, Sasha activated her acceleration skill, which doubled the target's speed. Realizing everything, Rude asked if they had planned to abandon him there from the very beginning. Badir, his expression completely different from before, asked if Rude had thought there was any other reason they brought the butcher of the miasma along. The group then fled, telling Rude to buy them as much time as possible. Enraged, Rude screamed, furious at their betrayal, but he had no time to dwell on it, as the Minotaur was already about to strike him. The monster's axe slammed into the ground and Rude laughed nervously, saying he had managed to dodge the attack, but he knew this was the end of the line for him. The Minotaur rammed him with its shoulder, smashing him against a wall. Yet at that moment the wall gave way, collapsing. On the other side was a massive pit, and both Rude and the Minotaur fell together. After crashing down from such a great height, Rude slowly opened his eyes, wondering if he was still alive. He realized he had survived only because he landed on top of the Minotaur's body. Though his arm was completely broken, he muttered that he didn't have much time left. Even if no more monsters appeared, he would die of blood loss or starvation before he had any chance to recover. At that moment he felt overwhelming hunger. He said he needed to eat something, anything, as soon as possible. His gaze fell on the Minotaur's corpse and he thought its flesh looked strangely delicious. Shocked at himself, he cursed, wondering what kind of idiocy he was thinking. Eating a monster could only bring disaster. Closing his eyes, he reflected on his miserable life. But then he remembered something. As a child, someone had once told him, "No matter how hard life becomes, never give up on living." With a bloodthirsty glare, Rib sank his teeth into the Minotaur's flesh. It was explained that if a human devoid of mana ate the flesh of a mana-rich monster, the monster's particles would invade their body. This state was called monstrification, a terrible fate, worse than death by poison. That was exactly why eating monsters was a taboo among adventurers. Still, to replenish the blood he had lost and satisfy his hunger, Rode took a gamble. That gamble led to an unexpected mutation. Even his broken arm regenerated. Rode then continued walking through the dungeon, bats watching him from the darkness, but his expression had changed. It was now more monstrous than human. The bats swooped down to attack, but Rud unleashed a new skill, Roar. His thunderous cry intimidated the enemies, knocking some unconscious while the others fled, almost like the Conqueror's haki from One Piece. Another new skill then activated, Physical Reinforcement, which temporarily boosted his strength. With the axe he had picked up earlier, he slaughtered the bats and devoured their flesh. From them he gained the ability Echolocation, which allowed him to detect creatures nearby, especially in the dark. Activating it, he sensed hordes of monsters approaching. With a twisted smile he growled, "Let's see who eats who this time." Rud rampaged, cutting down monsters and devouring them. Each time he ate one, he felt immense power surge through his body. After killing and consuming countless creatures, he finally emerged from the dungeon. Throwing his axe to the ground, he shouted at the sky, declaring he had survived. The scene shifted to the Adventurers Guild, where the atmosphere was heavy with tension. A man spoke, saying that after hearing the group's report, he had gathered all the adventurers who were inside the dungeon, except Rude, who had been with them. This man was Lancers, the guild master of Bologna. Bier, pretending to be grief-stricken, said that when they encountered the Minotaur on the 4th floor, Rud had been killed before they could protect him. He added that if only they had noticed the Minotaur sooner, they might have saved him. Sasha faked tears and Rick played along with the same act. Lancers nodded, saying he understood their situation. From now on, entry into that dungeon would be forbidden. But suddenly the sad receptionist looked up in shock. To her disbelief, the one who had just walked through the door was none other than Rude himself. It was Rude himself. Everyone was shocked to see the Butcher of the Miasma alive, wondering how he had survived. At that moment, Bier rushed forward to hug Rude, exclaiming how glad he was that Rude was alive. But as he embraced him, Bier whispered in Rude's ear that if he revealed anything he would kill him. The rest of the group greeted Rude as well, asking if he was all right, if he was injured, and claiming they had been worried. They insisted that they had even tried to return to save him, but the dungeon gate had already been sealed. With feigned sincerity, Bier declared that, whatever the case, Rude had survived and that deserved a celebration, but not here. However, as Baccaria looked closer, he noticed that Rude could barely move. Rude then spoke up, telling everyone present that they had used him as bait. The crowd grew uneasy at the accusation. Shocked, Baccaria asked what he was talking about. Lancers, the guildmaster, asked Rude to explain what he meant. Rude then revealed that Baccaria had stolen his supplies and attacked him from behind, that Rick had used his skill to redirect the Minotaur toward him, and that Sasha had accelerated the group so they could escape. Desperate, Barra denied everything, claiming none of that had happened. But Lancers calmly replied that they could clarify the truth with her. At that moment, a woman entered the guild hall, and everyone froze in fear. She was an officer of truth. Sasha asked, why an officer of truth, who almost never left the royal capital, was there. Lancers explained that due to the unusually high number of deaths among the porters in their party, he had called in an old favor to bring her here. He then asked the officer to determine who was telling the truth between Bayer's group and Rode. The woman declared that the members of Scarlet Blade were lying. Lancers raised his staff and confirmed that Rode was indeed telling the truth, leaving the adventurers in shock. Bayer lost control, shouting in disbelief, demanding how she could possibly know. Lancers explained that her ability was truth and it was impossible to acquire after reaching adulthood. Its effectiveness rivaled that of unique skills, and no lie could bypass it. What could be more reliable than the words of someone who had sworn to dedicate their power to the nation? Lancers then declared that abandoning companions was a grave taboo for adventurers. Worse still, Bagria's group had injured one of their own, using him as bait. Even without investigating their other crimes, this alone was enough to revoke their adventurer licenses, reducing them to slaves. Sasha and Rick panicked, insisting this couldn't be real. Barrett, enraged, cursed that someone like him could never become a slave, and if not for the officer of truth, no one would have discovered his plan. Consumed by rage, Bear attacked her, but Rude immediately stepped in, shielding her and warning Bayer never to lay a finger on the officer of truth. He then punched Bayer squarely in the face, sending him flying across the guild hall. Everyone gasped in shock at Rude's overwhelming strength. The scene shifted to the visitors' chamber of the guild. Lancers apologized to Rude for troubling him, acknowledging he must be exhausted, but Rude reassured him that he was fine. Lancers explained that the three culprits had been captured by his men, and would now be interrogated. If it was confirmed that they were repeat offenders who had used porters as bait, the Scarlet Blade members would lose all possessions and qualifications as adventurers, becoming slaves. But since Badir had gone as far as trying to kill an officer of truth, it was likely he would never be seen again. Returning to the matter of rewards, Lancers said that the group had forfeited all profits they had made inside the dungeon. Instead, all of it would go to Rude. He informed him there were about 200,000 Regan, and asked Rude to accept it. Rudd left the chamber with the money in hand, hugging it tightly with joy. He thought that this would cover a large part of his expenses, and that it would have taken him a long time to gather such an amount, even if he collected miasma every single day. To think that one could make so much money just by being an adventurer. It amazed him. He then realized that people had stopped insulting him, likely because they had witnessed what happened earlier, but that didn't mean they would suddenly treat him kindly. He also thought that if he kept standing out like this, people might begin to suspect his sudden growth in strength and abilities. So, he decided he would continue testing his luck in the Miasma dungeon as before. Determined, he declared to himself that he was done being negative. At last he had earned good money, and from here on he was going to move forward. Reg now had money for equipment and food, and first he decided to take a look at the tool shop. While browsing, a bag caught his attention, and he thought he might grab something to eat as well. The next day, Rude returned to the Miasma dungeon. This time he was able to kill the rats with ease. He thought to himself that yesterday he would have been running away from just 5 of them, but now he could defeat them so effortlessly. Rudd activated his Analyze ability and checked the Miasma rat's status. He realized this was the ability he had gained from eating that strange monster, and it could even be used on corpses. The rats were level 9, which made him wonder how much his own status had increased. Since defeating them was so easy, he estimated he might be around level 20. When he opened his status, however, Rude was shocked. His level had jumped to 42 and all of his stats had risen dramatically. Just yesterday he had only been level 7. This kind of growth was extremely rare. He needed to check the new abilities he had acquired. When he opened his inventory, an overwhelming arsenal of skills appeared before him. There were so many that he couldn't even count them all. Excited, Rudd thought back to the broken wall he had fallen through in the dungeon, but it had already been sealed. Since the new dungeon would remain closed for some time, today he planned only a light exploration of the Miasma dungeon. Still, seeing so many new abilities made him eager to test them. He wanted to know just how effective they were in the deeper floors, plus he was curious to try the new bag he had bought. He decided he would carefully choose the right monster for his first test. The scene shifted to Rude on the 6th floor, slaughtering monsters as he advanced. Soon he passed the 9th floor, then the 13th. But none of the monsters there were enough for him. He needed to go deeper to find a worthy prey. Eventually, Rude reached the 24th floor where he encountered a creature wielding a massive blade. Using Analyze, he discovered it was a lizardman soldier at level 25, with abilities in one-handed swordsmanship, shield techniques, and miasma resistance. Ruda noted that lizardmen usually fought in groups, but this one was alone. If it was just a single soldier, perhaps he could take it on. Drawing his sword, Rudd charged forward. The lizardman detected him instantly, and blocked with its arm. "Not bad," Reed muttered, "but I won't miss the next strike." However, before he could continue, the lizardman suddenly turned and fled. Confused, Rudd chased after it, wondering why it was running. The chase ended in a dead-end corridor. Rudd drew his sword again, declaring that it had no way to escape now. But then, the lizardman's eyes changed. Rudd realized too late, it wasn't the prey. He was, at that moment, 2 more lizardman soldiers appeared behind him. Surrounded, Rudd acknowledged the danger. Even with his current advantage in levels, this was a bad situation. The soldiers attacked in formation, forcing Rudd to focus on taking down at least one. He struck at one soldier, but it blocked his sword. Gritting his teeth, Rudd pressed on. Just as he was about to finish one off, another intercepted with a shield, while a third attacked him from behind. Narrowly dodging, Rudd chuckled nervously. "That was close. But how many more of you are there?" He realized their coordination was too precise, their ambush far too advanced. Suddenly a sharp sound pierced the air. Looking up, Rudd saw a different lizard man commanding from the rear. Using Analyze, Rudd identified it as a lizardman general level 32 with one-handed swordsmanship, shield techniques, miasma resistance, and command. Rudd grinned. Finally, the leader shows himself. The general roared, and all the soldiers charged at Rudd, activating physical reinforcement. Rudd struck several at once, using one's head as a foothold to leap toward the general. He slashed down with full force, but the attack had no effect. The general countered immediately, swinging at Rudd from close range. With no time to dodge, Rudd activated Iron Body, muttering, "I'm not the only one with tricks up my sleeve." Still confused, he reactivated Analyze. He was sure his attack had landed, but it had done no damage. Strange, it doesn't have any reinforcement or resistance skills, so why didn't my strike work? It was probably another lizard's ability. Rudd started analyzing all the other lizards, but none of them had any suspicious abilities. He said he couldn't see any special skill among them. However, he eventually found a lizard with a huge cut across its chest. One of that lizard's abilities was substitution. Rudd then realized that this was the lizard taking all the damage. He immediately rushed at it, killed it on the spot, and said, "It must be tough being a subordinate who only exists to be substituted. Don't take it personally." The general then began shouting, and all the lizards charged at Rudd. He activated his web manipulation, remarking that their decision to group together actually made things much easier for him. He cast his webs, trapping them all at once. Rudd then approached the general and said that this time it was his victory, before finally cutting off the lizard general's head. After defeating them, Rudd said it was time to eat. He had bought a magical bag with the money he earned from the guild, and now it was finally time to use it. The space inside the bag was magically expanded, and its weight completely vanished when closed. Inside he had placed some cooking utensils and seasonings. He explained that when he first fell into that hidden floor, he was desperate to survive, but he had always wanted to try such things. He began cutting up the lizard meat, frying it in a pan, and wondered how monster meat would taste once cooked and seasoned. With his mouth watering, he took a bite and exclaimed that it was far more delicious than he had expected. Who would have thought monster meat could be this good? He even worried he might get addicted to it. After eating, he gained new skills: one-handed swordsmanship, shield techniques, miasma resistance, and command. Still, he wondered why the meat tasted so good. Could it be because of the magical particles inside monsters? He reflected on how useful the Minotaur's skills, the spider's armor, and the evil eye had been to him. Yet he still had abilities from other monsters he hadn't tested, such as the lightning wolf and the black serpent. On his way to the 21st floor, he encountered some bees and frogs. Using his lightning cloak, he electrocuted them all. Afterward, he commented that the skill was very useful while the monsters themselves specialized in inflicting abnormal statuses, but they had run into the wrong opponent. Now it was time to eat frog and insect meat. He breaded and fried everything, saying the poisonous frogs were so tender that their taste reminded him of mushrooms. It made him crave a beer to go with the meal, though sadly he didn't have one. From this meal he gained new skills: poison, temperature variation, powder scales, paralyzing powder scales, and aerial slash. Suddenly he heard a noise coming from deep within the dungeon. It sounded like a collision, and human voices. Shocked that adventurers had reached this far, he quickly stored his food in the bag and remarked that it was rare to encounter another party in battle. He thought this might be his lucky chance to gather some information. The scene then showed a group fighting against a hooded figure. One of them said that her attack hurt too much and couldn't believe she still had so much mana left. Another replied that the trouble she caused would be worth it. He then pulled back her hood, revealing an elf. He sneered, saying, "Of course, an elf. I wonder how much she'll sell for on the black market." At that moment, Rude appeared and said he had been hoping to meet some friendly adventurers. He added that although he didn't know exactly what was happening, he couldn't just stand by and watch a woman being attacked like that. The man with the scar over his eye demanded to know who Rude was. Smiling, Rude replied that he was just an adventurer. The elf shouted at Rude to get out of there immediately, explaining that these men were adventurer hunters. Rude activated his analysis skill, recalling rumors that all of them were high-level adventurers. However, when he tried to analyze the scarred man, he couldn't see his full status. The only thing visible was his level 65. The others were level 52, 56, and 58. Rude realized they must be using obscurement skills or perhaps magical tools. The scarred man, clearly the leader, ordered his men to capture Rudd. His henchmen rushed forward, moving much faster than Rudd had expected. Even so, Rudd managed to defend himself with his sword. The blonde attacker smirked and said, "Not bad for a low ranker." Rudd mocked the man, saying that he was weak. The man grew angry and began attacking Rudd again. At that moment, Rudd activated his poison ability, spitting venom directly into the man's face. The man fell to the ground, screaming in agony as his face began to corrode. He shouted that Rudd was almost like a monster. The elf thought to herself that this was a reckless way of fighting, something unfitting for an adventurer, but for someone as desperate as him it was the only way to survive. The scarred man realized that Rudd had a unique poison ability and concluded that they couldn't underestimate him. He ordered the three of them to attack Rudd all at once. They charged at him, striking relentlessly. Rudd thought that if he stopped moving for even a single moment, he would be killed. He was caught off guard and was about to receive a kick to the face. However, just as the kick landed, Rudd activated his iron body skill. The blow still sent him flying into a river of miasma. The scarred man noted how tough Rudd was, surprised that his neck hadn't broken from the kick. Another one of the hunters said he would finish Rudd off right there. But suddenly Rudd dove deeper into the poisonous swamp. When one of the men tried to follow, the scarred leader stopped him immediately, warning that it was a poisonous swamp and there was no guarantee he'd come back alive. He was certain Rudd wouldn't be able to withstand the swamp's poison either, so he assumed he would resurface soon. Time passed, and Rudd remained underwater in the poison. He wondered how long they planned to wait for him. After a while he thought, "It's time to fight like an adventurer. I was lucky to fall into this swamp." Not only did it contain the usual miasma, but the poisonous vapors around it would rapidly drain the stamina of the adventurer hunters. The hunters began to grow restless. One of them complained that more than 10 minutes had passed and his head was already starting to ache. Rudd thought it was time to end it. He would have liked to drag this fight out a little longer, but if he delayed too much, the elf would suffer even more. She was already badly injured. Finally, Rudd emerged from the poisonous swamp. He taunted them, saying the effects of the poison and miasma must have been quite rough for them. The men sighed with relief, saying he had finally given up. though he had already caused them too much trouble. Rode then revealed, smiling, that unfortunately for them, he was immune to abnormal status effects, so he couldn't understand the suffering they were experiencing. The scarred man immediately realized that Rudd had nullification of abnormal statuses. He also realized Rudd had tricked them. He ordered his companions to attack right away. They rushed at Rudd, but the swamp's poison continued to drain their stamina, and the accumulated miasma steadily weakened their stats. One of them struck at Rude from behind, but Rude activated his iron body again. Immediately afterward he unleashed his lightning cloak, electrocuting the two hunters fighting him. As they screamed, he fried them both until one of them cursed, calling him a bastard. Rude then activated his new ability, Aerial Slash, cutting both of them down at the same time. The scarred man was shocked. Rudd had poison, iron body, lightning cloak, and even aerial slash. He wondered why a human possessed so many monster abilities. Rudd answered coldly that it was none of his concern. The scarred man thought that under normal circumstances, he was far superior to humans in physical combat, but in this miasma-filled swamp he was steadily losing ground. He then activated his agility boost and lunged at Rude, but Rude countered by activating his physical reinforcement, shattering the man's sword with a single strike and cleaving him in half as though it were nothing. Rudd remarked that if not for the abnormal status effects, the scarred man would have been much stronger than him. The scene then shifted to the elf. She thanked Rudd for saving her life, saying she couldn't imagine what would have happened to her without him. Rudd replied that he couldn't just leave her in such a pitiful situation. He noticed that despite her efforts to remain composed, her body was still heavily affected by the miasma. He told her he had done what he could to give her first aid, but setting that aside, he thought it was rare to see an elf in such a remote area. He wondered what circumstances had led her to be hunted by adventurer hunters. Suddenly they heard a loud noise. A massive monster appeared before them. Rudd realized it must be the leader of the moths. Its level was 37, and it possessed many poison-related abilities. He thought to himself that after everything he had faced, this moth wouldn't be able to defeat him or intimidate him just because of its size. The moth then used its wind slash ability and the attack almost struck the elf. Rudd asked if she was alright, and she replied that she was. Rudd said that she had given him quite a scare, so he thought it was only fair to return the favor. He turned to the giant moth and declared that flying away wouldn't help it escape his reach. He activated his aerial slash and launched it toward the moth, cutting into it multiple times. In response, the moth released its paralyzing scales. Rudd simply smiled, knowing paralysis wouldn't work on him, but then he remembered the elf was still there. Before he could react, she raised her staff and cast a powerful wind spell. Rudd was surprised by the strength of her magic, but he thought to himself, as expected of an elf. After her spell, Rudd finished the moth off with a decisive strike to its head. The elf, catching her breath, asked him if he was immune to poison and paralysis, and also why his abilities seemed to resemble those of monsters. Rudd hesitated, wondering how he could possibly explain it to her, but before she could press him further, her body weakened and she collapsed to her knees. Concerned, Rudd asked if she had been struck by the paralyzing scales, but she shook her head. "No, it's something else," she said weakly. She promised to explain everything once they escaped from the dungeon. The scene shifted. They finally emerged from the dungeon and sat down beneath a tree. The elf sighed with relief, saying she felt much better now that she was outside the labyrinth. Before explaining what had happened to her, she introduced herself. Her name was Alicia and she was a former adventurer. Rudd, shocked, asked if she was the very same Alicia of the Emerald Storms. Laughing softly, she admitted that he already knew her. Rudd exclaimed that of course he did. She had been a member of the most renowned S-rank party in the Kingdom of Ludius, the Azure Trials. Everyone knew that party's name, but as far as he remembered, the Azure Trials had been annihilated. Alicia nodded. "Yes, it's been 5 years. We were defeated by monsters. That day we challenged a creature waiting for us in the depths of an S-rank dungeon, the Abyss Dungeon. In that battle we lost our leader. Another member was forced to retire due to severe injuries, and one was completely devoured by the labyrinth itself. As for me," she trailed off, showing the scar in the center of her chest. Embarrassed, Rudd asked what that was. She explained that it was a curse placed upon her that day, a so-called low-level curse. Rode frowned, saying he had never heard of such a thing. Alicia agreed, saying she had never encountered one either. She had tried every possible method to break it, but the most she could do was slow its progression. She explained that the adventurer hunters had learned of her curse and tried to exploit her condition for profit. In any case, she said quietly, my life will end when my level reaches 0, but even so I couldn't bear the thought of surrendering to those men. Rude thought for a moment, then suggested that perhaps he could help her with the curse. He pulled out his guild card and considered one of his skills, substitution. This ability allowed him to select a target and take their attacks and negative statuses onto himself. He asked her if she would allow him to test something. Though she didn't fully understand what he meant, she eventually agreed. Rudder placed his hand on her shoulder and activated substitution. Alicia gasped as she felt the curse leaving her body, transferring into his. She begged him to stop, warning that he would become cursed instead, but Rudd simply smiled and told her to trust him. In that moment, the curse shifted completely onto Rude. He then activated his unique ability Nullification of Abnormal Statuses, shattering the curse entirely. Staring at his hand, he whispered that it seemed to have worked. Alicia, stunned, struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Rudd told her to check her guild card. When she did, her status had returned to normal. She could hardly believe it. The curse was gone. Rudd explained that this was his unique ability, Nullification of Abnormal Statuses. He had gambled on the idea that he could nullify a curse once he transferred it to himself, and thankfully it had worked. Calling him an idiot, Alicia demanded to know why he would risk so much for her, a complete stranger. But even as she scolded him, she thanked him deeply. Rudd gently comforted her, resting a hand on her shoulder. The scene then shifted to a bar. Alicia was in high spirits, laughing and drinking happily. She said the food there was cheap, and the beer was delicious. She praised Rude for knowing such good places. Embarrassed, he simply gave her a thumbs up, thinking to himself that the place really was nice, at least until they were eventually kicked out. He then asked her if she would be alright drinking so much, especially since only a few hours earlier she had been gravely wounded. Smiling, Alicia said she was ready for another round. Besides, on a day as good as this, why wouldn't I drink? They toasted, and Rudd asked what her plans were now. She replied that first she wanted to get to know him better. With a cute expression, she asked why he had decided to become an adventurer. Rudd explained that long ago his village had been attacked by monsters. Those monsters killed his family and friends and took everything from him. But thanks to an S-rank adventurer, he survived. A flashback showed that adventurer saving young Rude from a group of monsters. Rude said he would never forget that sight, and ever since then he had dreamed of becoming an S-rank adventurer himself, so he could help people in the same way that he declared was his greatest life goal. Alicia smiled and told him it was a noble dream. Rudd asked if she wouldn't laugh at him, but she shook her head. She explained that she too had once dreamed of reaching SAC rank and becoming stronger and stronger, at least until she was cursed. She also believed some of her comrades were still trapped in the depths of the Abyss dungeon. No matter what it took, she was determined to face that monster again. But for now, she said, we both need to grow stronger to reach our goals. She then asked Rude if he would like to form a party with her. Rude was taken aback by the sudden proposal. Before he could respond, the same men who had mocked him before appeared, grabbing Alicia by the arm. They sneered that Rude was drinking with a beautiful woman like him and invited her to drink with them instead. Rudd stood up, demanding they release her immediately, which only made them angrier. But before things escalated, Alicia ordered them to stop. She reminded them they were in a tavern, and if they wanted to fight, there was another way to settle it. The scene cut to the three of them sitting at a table, drinks lined up. Alicia declared, whoever drinks the most wins. And so, the contest began. As they drank heavily, the entire tavern cheered them on. Before long, the two men collapsed unconscious, while Alicia remained steady and victorious. Rudd gave her another thumbs up. Rudd told her she had done well, especially since she had already been drunk before the contest. But swaying, Ilya drunkenly insisted, you're my savior. I haven't fallen so low that I'd just sit by and watch while my savior is mocked. Yet before she could finish, she passed out in Rud's lap. With a sigh, Rud said he had no choice. He activated his substitution skill, transferring her drunkenness onto himself. Alicia quickly woke up, surprised. Rud explained that he had taken her intoxication since he couldn't get drunk anyway. Laughing in amazement, she said, "First you took my curse, and now my drunkenness. Your ability is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. More than ever, I want to form a party with you." Of course, she didn't stop drinking. In fact, the first thing she did after waking up was order another round. She soon walked up to a sign advertising the tavern's special dish and said it was a shame she couldn't try it. The tavern owner explained that the fishing grounds of Barnabas had been overrun by monsters. He had already sent requests to the guild, but all the high-level adventurers were currently away. He asked Rud and Alicia if they would accept the request instead. The scene shifted to Barnabas's fishing grounds. Rud and Alicia were on a boat. She pointed out that this was the Barnabas's fishing field, and declared that they would defeat the monsters quickly so they could enjoy the tavern's special dish. But suddenly, one of the monsters attacked from beneath the water. Rud smiled, saying, "Finally, they've shown up. This must be the monster the owner mentioned." Alicia, however, urged him to look more carefully. From a bird's-eye view, they saw dozens of monsters surrounding their boat. Rud activated his analysis ability and identified them as level 23 creatures. Their skills included high-speed swimming, water bullets, and sniping. The monsters began firing water bullets at Rud. He realized he couldn't dodge such attacks in the limited space of the boat. So, Rud jumped into the water, immediately drawing the attention of all the fish-like monsters, which rushed at him. Smiling, he activated his lightning cloak, electrocuting them all in an instant. Alicia was astonished at how quickly he had dealt with them, but Rud, still wary, said there was more to come. Then he began to wonder why weren't the remaining monsters attacking him. Rud wondered if the monsters were being cautious, or perhaps trying to protect something. He told Alicia that he would dive to the bottom to investigate and asked her for a favor. Tying a rope around his waist, Rud descended into the depths of the sea. Once underwater, he quickly realized the truth. The monsters weren't attacking him, but neither were they fleeing. That could only mean they were protecting something. And then he saw it, a massive creature lurking on the ocean floor. Using analysis, Rud discovered it was level 38. Its abilities included paralysis poison, autonomy poison resistance, and accelerated regeneration. Rud noted that the creature, called a nemono, was enormous, but it didn't resemble a sea anemone at all. Instead, it looked more like a hermit crab. Suddenly, a monster fish emerged from one of its tentacles, and Rud realized that was how it was spawning the smaller fish. If he didn't defeat the boss itself, killing its minions would be pointless. Since the nemono wasn't attacking yet, Rud decided to prepare himself first, but at that moment the fish swarmed his legs and began dragging him down. He realized the reason they hadn't attacked before was to distract him from the tentacles. Activating his lightning cloak, Rud electrocuted all the monsters around him. "Now then," Rud thought aloud, "how about you, big guy?" As long as he maintained contact, even such a massive body should be electrocuted. But then he noticed something strange. The tentacles were no longer attached to the crab. That's when he remembered the Nemona had the autonomy skill. It had severed its own limbs the moment the lightning struck. The giant crab lunged at Rud. By now he had been underwater for too long and was running out of breath. He tugged on the rope, trusting Alicia to pull him back. With her wind magic, she hauled him to the surface. Alicia asked if he was all right, and Rud thanked her for saving his life. He explained that a boss was down there continuously producing the fish. It also possessed accelerated regeneration, so he needed to defeat it quickly. Alicia warned that monsters had a huge advantage underwater, and her magic couldn't reach them effectively. She asked if Rud had a plan. "There's only one way," he said. He thought back to how she had revealed her curse and her desire to form a party with him. For that reason, before she could decide, he felt he needed to reveal his own secret. Picking up one of the dead fish, he told her not to tell anyone what she was about to see. The scene shifted. Rud was back underwater. This time, he had a new ability, high-speed swimming. Cutting through the water with incredible speed, he slaughtered the monster fish in his path. The boss sent its tentacles after him again, but this time Rude easily dodged and closed the distance. With a powerful strike of his blade, he pierced the hermit crab, activating his lightning cloak once more. The electricity surged through the beast, finishing it for good. Rudd thought to himself that now the fishing grounds should return to peace, but then his mind turned to Alicia. What was she thinking after seeing him devour monsters? What would she say when he returned? When Rude surfaced, Alicia was gone. He smiled bitterly, wondering why he had expected her to wait for him. I guess I was too hopeful this time, he thought. But then suddenly a voice called out, "You took too long." Turning, he saw Alicia holding some sticks. She said she was glad to see he wasn't hurt, and asked if he had defeated the boss. Rude nodded, and she thanked God. She explained that she couldn't just sit and do nothing while he was fighting, so she had gathered wood to make a fire. It would help dry his clothes. Surprised, Reed asked if she was really all right after seeing what he had done. She admitted that at first she had been shocked, but the fact that he had trusted her enough to reveal his secret made her happier than anything else. Grateful, Rudy thanked her for staying. He confessed he had wanted to obtain the boss's abilities as well, so he had cut off a piece of it and brought it back, but eating it in front of her felt awkward. Instead, he had also caught some normal fish for her. He told her he had even grabbed one of the Barnama's fish for her, though it might feel strange to eat next to a monster corpse. Alicia didn't care in the slightest. Excited, she said she would absolutely eat it. As the sun set, Rode smiled and told her that while they ate, he would share the story of the very first time he had eaten a monster. Later that night, Alicia was eating happily. Between bites, she laughed and said the meal was delicious. Alicia was surprised that Rude ate monsters and asked if that was the reason he had eaten his first one. Rude answered that it was thanks to that habit that a weakling hanker like him was able to take a step closer to his dream. Alicia smiled and said she finally understood. He had used that power to save her from the adventurer hunters, and from her curse. And when cooked like this, even monsters looked rather delicious. Rode had prepared jerneb fillets and sautéed tentacle miso. Smiling, he said that monsters were surprisingly tasty. He admitted that he didn't really need to eat jernebs anymore, but he cooked them anyway and asked if Alicia wanted to try some. She refused, saying she couldn't be sure she would survive the side effects, so she would pass this time. However, she asked him once more if he would join her party. Red grew serious, asking if she didn't have more powerful acquaintances she could count on. She explained that it had already been 5 years since she was cursed. Even if she hadn't died in that labyrinth, considering the lifespan of humans, many of her former comrades had likely already retired. And besides, most frontline adventurers were a little unhinged. No matter how powerful they were, she couldn't trust her back to them. What she wanted was someone she could adventure with, someone she could entrust her back to without hesitation. And if it was Rudd, she believed she could do that. Rudd smiled and agreed to form a party with her. The scene then shifted to the Adventurers Guild in the Bologna division. Alicia was full of energy, excited about preparing for their first quest together. Rude doubted they would be able to get a good job since one of them was a hankier. Alicia admitted he was right but said she already knew what she wanted. They approached the receptionist where Alicia announced they were forming a party starting today, and asked if they could be registered. When the receptionist saw Alicia's adventurer card, she was shocked to learn that Alicia was an S-rank adventurer, the famous Emerald Storm Alicia. Her unique ability was spirit magic, not to mention the countless other abilities she possessed. The receptionist, still stunned, asked why someone like her would form a party with the Miasma butcher. At that, Alicia's expression darkened, and the woman quickly corrected herself, embarrassed, saying she understood. Alicia then said she also wanted Rudd's rank to be raised and asked what requirements he still lacked. The receptionist checked some papers and explained that Rudd already had enough achievements. The only thing missing were combat accomplishments. Alicia then requested the hardest subjugation mission available so they could complete it together. The receptionist agreed, saying that at that very moment, there was a mission to exterminate a pack of gray wolves. The scene shifted to the outskirts of Bologna. Rude was already moving stealthily among the wolves, picking them off one by one, but then one of the wolves howled, summoning reinforcements. Rude told Alicia that the newcomers were all hers. She nodded, summoned her spirit, and called forth Sylphid. She asked the spirit to lend her its power and Rude was stunned. That was her unique ability, spirit magic. With a single command, she unleashed a razor-wind gale that tore through the wolves in front of her, slicing some clean in half. Rude thought to himself that her power was overwhelming. Dodging something like that would be impossible. Alicia commented that her strength was still being hindered by her curse, and Rude thought he couldn't even imagine what her full power might be like. Just then, several wolves ambushed Rude from behind. He realized there were still far more of them hidden, and he wouldn't be able to block the attack in time. At the last moment, Alicia called out to Sylphid. In an instant, Rude vanished from the wolves' reach. Looking up, the wolves saw the two of them hovering in the air. Rude was overjoyed. "You can even do this," he exclaimed, thanking Alicia for saving his life again, but she told him that if he wanted to thank someone, he should thank the little spirit. Still, she warned, they couldn't let their guard down. She had spotted about 5 more wolves hiding in the bushes, and likely many more nearby. Rudd said that it was his turn now, and activated his echolocation. He announced that there were about 30 wolves in total, and with the ones they had already defeated, they could finish the mission in one strike. He asked Alicia to focus her attack on the spot he would indicate. He thought to himself that echolocation lost accuracy in open areas, and even Alicia couldn't aim at multiple targets at once, but if they attacked in a circle they could herd the gray wolves into one place. Alicia nodded and said, "All right," she had already done her part, so the rest was up to Rude. Rudon appeared in the middle of the wolves with glowing red eyes, and activated his paralysis breath, causing all the wolves to collapse to the ground. The scene shifted, and it was nearly nightfall. By then he had killed a total of 52 wolves. Alicia said she couldn't believe they had encountered so many in just one day. Replied that perhaps their numbers really were. "By the way, what was that spirit magic you used earlier?" Alicia explained that she could use spirit magic from the spirits that exist in nature, and she introduced Sylphid to Rudd. She said that spirits are normally everywhere, even if they aren't visible, but to use their magic one must first use their own magic as compensation. Even so, it's possible to cast powerful magic while using very little MP. As he saw earlier, she can create that floating phenomenon. Rude said he had never heard of a wind spell as strong as that. At that moment Sylphid was pulling Rude's hair and Alicia laughed at him, saying that Sylphid loves to play pranks. The more he complains, the more she'll enjoy it. Alicia then said that it would soon be night, so they needed to return quickly, and this time they would fly back. While they were flying, Rude was having fun, saying that it was really cool, and asked Alicia what other types of magic she could use. She replied that she specializes in water, ice, light, and earth magic, but she's not very good with spirits of darkness and fire. If a spirit isn't compatible with you, it will demand a huge amount of mana, or it might not even lend you its power at all. This showed that Sylphid really liked Rude. Rude then asked if Sylphid really liked him, since she was pulling his ear, and Alicia laughed, saying of course she does. Suddenly Rudd saw a village on fire and called for Alicia. When the flames of the village came into view, they saw a monster among them, with people running away in panic. 2 adventurers nearby, terrified, wondered if gray wolves weren't supposed to be the only monsters in that area, and what the hell that thing was doing there, since it was a Baphomet. The Baphomet then raised its hand, summoned a summoning symbol, and launched a flaming spear toward the adventurers. However, just before it hit them, Rudd protected them using his water bullet skill. Alicia asked if the 2 were okay, and they said yes. She then said that from now on she would handle the monster and asked them to summarize the situation. Meanwhile, Rude analyzed the creature. Its abilities included basic fire magic, echolocation, increased mana recovery speed, basic earth magic, and mental reinforcement. Rudd thought that even if the Baphomet's level was lower than that of the lizard general, its stats were on another level. That meant it was different from ordinary monsters. The Baphomet then summoned 4 fire spears. Rude noted that it used basic fire magic. He said that his own fire magic was weak, not something he could use effectively in battle, but but if he could eat that monster's meat, he might gain the ability to use fire magic in combat as well. That thought made Rude excited. When Rude tried to attack, the monster blocked his strike using its iron claws. Rude said he would try using brute force, but the Baphomet quickly fired more flaming spears at close range. Rude barely avoided the attack in time. Elysia asked if he was okay, and he said yes. Rude realized that the monster had fired 2 spears and kept the other 2 in reserve, ready to use them defensively. He thought to himself that the Baphomet was going to be a very tough opponent. Elysia said it looked like the creature had raised its guard and suggested they exchange information while they still could. She explained that the villagers hadn't all evacuated yet, though she had already asked the people they met earlier to help with the evacuation. Still, she wanted to minimize collateral damage to the village, which meant she couldn't use powerful magic to defeat it in one strike. Rude thought that Elysia must have run low on magic power because of their earlier battle and long journey, so they couldn't rely too much on her spirit magic. He decided he had to act quickly, but Elysia told him to leave it to her and just trust her. Rude then thought that no matter what happened, he needed to keep moving forward. He charged toward the Baphomet again, even as the monster fired flames at him, while Elysia supported him from the rear using water magic. Rude noticed that she managed to cancel out the Baphomet's spell with an opposing one of equal power. However, the Baphomet suddenly conjured several stones and hurled them at Rude. Elysia shouted for him to keep advancing. Rude raised his sword and sliced the stones in half. Now there were stone fragments of the same mass, and Elysia was maintaining her magic while avoiding collateral damage. Her mana control was incredible. As expected from a former rank S adventurer, Rude then jumped forward, activated his physical reinforcement, and cut off Baphomet's fingers. When the Baphomet tried to attack Rude with its other hand, Elysia fired a burst of flames directly into its mouth. After hitting it, she asked mockingly how it felt to taste its own power. On the other side of the flames were the villagers and the 2 adventurers. One of them said, "That explosion earlier and that terrible scream. Could it be that the adventurers managed to defeat the monster?" The other adventurer replied, "I'm really sorry. If I weren't injured, I could have stayed behind to help them." At that moment, Elysia appeared and thanked them for helping with the evacuation. The red-haired man asked if she was okay and she said yes. The Baphomet had been defeated. However, she added that even though she landed a fatal blow, the monster somehow survived, so it might attack again. They needed to go after it as soon as possible. That was why she had a small favor to ask of them. The man said that as long as it was within their ability, they would do anything. Elysia then asked if they had a bit of food to share with her since she was starving and feeling dizzy. The scene then shifted to the forest near the village, where Rude was with the Baphomet's body. Elysia appeared, saying that she had returned. Rude asked how the villagers were, and she said that it seemed everyone had managed to evacuate safely, thanks to those adventurers. She also told Rude that she had informed the villagers they were going after the Baphomet so no one would suspect that its body had disappeared. Rude apologized, but she said it was fine. Then Rude mentioned that the Baphomet's meat looked really delicious. Soon after, he had already made Baphomet soup. He said he was just going to add a bit of Artemis and ginger. After seasoning it, he tasted the soup and commented that it had a strong goat flavor, but aside from that, it was delicious. By eating it, he gained new abilities: basic fire magic, basic earth magic, mental reinforcement, iron claws, and increased mana recovery speed. Elysia admitted that it did look delicious, but said that watching someone eat a humanoid monster was a bit too strange. Rude thought she was right, and it was a little scary that he was already getting used to it. At that moment, a few boar-type monsters appeared. Rude said there were too many monsters in that area, and since they were already there, it was time to test his new combat magic. However, when he tried to cast a fire spell, nothing happened. The boars activated their quick step ability and charged straight at Rude, knocking his soup onto the ground. Elysia commented that she thought he would be able to use magic now, but since she was low on mana, she wouldn't be able to help much in that battle. Rude, clearly frustrated, said that this was unforgivable. They had spilled his soup. He had drained blood, removed filth, and done all that work just to eat, and now it was ruined. Furious, Rude said that since he had gone to such trouble seasoning the Baphomet meat to perfection, the boars would now take responsibility by becoming his next meal. Just as he was about to charge at them, Elisa stopped him, telling him to calm down. She explained that the ability the boars had used, Quick Step, increased their acceleration power, which made their attacks considerably stronger. Even though this ability favored them in close combat, Red and Elisa should fight from a distance to avoid being caught in their range. In other words, they needed to run immediately. After running, they managed to hide at the top of a tree. Elisa said it seemed they had managed to shake the monsters off. Then she brought up the topic of the fire magic that Rudd had failed to cast earlier. Rudd said that he had never had problems activating the skills he acquired, at least not until now. Elisa suggested that he check using his analysis skill. When he did, he saw the abilities Basic Fire Magic and Basic Earth Magic listed, along with the note that he should instinctively comprehend them. Elisa then said that if he still couldn't use them, there was only one explanation: his brain was too limited to understand the magic. Rudd asked if that wasn't a little cruel for her to say, but Elisa replied that even so, he should be able to use at least a weak fire spell, so that wasn't a good enough reason for him to be unable to use it. She then added that perhaps to use magic derived from monster abilities, he needed to learn how to manipulate his mana properly. Rudd realized that it wasn't just about having magic power, he also needed to control and direct his mana. He didn't really understand much about mana, but he thought it might be similar to absorbing monster abilities. Rudd said he could try that. He stretched out his hand and tried to remember what it felt like the first time he ate the Minotaur's meat. He recalled feeling an explosion of power inside his body, as if he could project that energy outward. At that moment Rudd opened his eyes. He had finally managed to use fire magic. He realized that as long as he could feel the mana, he could use it as if it were part of his own body. With that, he unleashed flames upon the boars. The scene changed, showing the spirits of the boars ascending into the sky. Rudry was already preparing their meat to eat. He apologized to Elisa for making her wait, but she told him not to worry. She knew it was something he needed to do, even though he was making quite an irritated expression. She explained that to use his magical abilities he needed to use mana, not magic power, and since his mana didn't seem depleted from that previous attack, she believed he could continue using it. Red then said that when he felt the mana spreading through his body, he immediately understood how to use his abilities. If mana could replace magic power, then perhaps he could use it to strengthen his body and weapons. Among adventurers, many chose to refine their magical skills, and most preferred close-range combat. By circulating magical energy through the body, their physical abilities would also improve, and if they used weapons, their attack power would increase significantly, even allowing them to release magical slashes. Elisa said she understood that, explained why he couldn't use his abilities earlier since he didn't have much magic power left. Rudd agreed, saying that was exactly it. But now, it seemed he had much more mana than magic power. More importantly, he realized he could replenish his mana by eating monsters, and that was how he gained the quick-step ability. Elisa thought about it and said that, in other words, he could absorb mana through food and even store it within his body. But most importantly, she added that those pork ribs looked really delicious. Rode noticed Elisa drooling and asked if she wanted to eat some too. Embarrassed, she quickly said no. Suddenly they heard a loud noise and wondered what it was. At that moment, a gigantic boar appeared in front of them. Rhodes said it was probably the leader of the boars. However, the monster was incredibly fast. It was already right in front of them. Rhodes managed to save Elisa at the last moment. She realized that by the time she sensed the distance between them, the monster had already closed it, and she wondered what was going on. She thought to herself that they weren't inside a dungeon, so why were there so many monsters here? Reb then noticed that his food had been knocked over again, which made him furious. He shouted at the monsters to stop interrupting him, then muttered that, on the bright side, the boar would make a good roast. However, he observed that the creature had fire resistance, which meant they couldn't roast it even by pouring oil over it. Rid analyzed its stats and noted they were very high. He activated his basic earth magic ability, thinking that the creature only had quick step and fire resistance. He then shouted at the monster to prepare itself to face the wrath of a glutton and summoned a giant stone hand toward it. However, the stone hand shattered easily, and Rude couldn't understand why the monster's body seemed as hard as iron. The boar then rammed Rude with its head, sending him flying. Immediately after, it charged at Elysia, who summoned Sylphid and unleashed her wind magic. She thought she had hit it somehow, but it wasn't enough. She wasn't using any special ability, and the creature's muscles and fur were far too thick and tough. Neither wind nor earth magic seemed powerful enough to stop it. The monster charged again, but then suddenly stopped. Rudd had activated his roar ability. He shouted for it not to dare ignore him since their battle wasn't over yet. He realized he couldn't use Quickstep or Iron Body at that moment. If he tried to turn this into a battle of endurance, there was a chance the monster would target Elysia instead. He didn't have any single ability powerful enough to bring it down in one hit. However, he noticed that the boar only seemed capable of charging straight ahead. Rudd closed his eyes and said it would be the first time he'd try this. Raising his sword, he thought about it carefully. First, gather mana from within his body, then imagine it flowing into the blade. As the monster closed the distance, Rudd swung his sword, slicing the boar clean in half, something that even surprised Elysia. Shocked, she asked if he had used mana to enhance his sword, even though he'd never practiced that technique before. Rudd said he tried it because he felt like he could. His mana had been overflowing. But right after that, Rudd's sword shattered into several pieces, leaving the poor guy devastated. Desperate and depressed, Rudd said that he had used the sword a lot, so there wasn't much he could do. Elysia said it seemed the sword couldn't handle the amount of mana he had infused into it. She explained that a weapon is practically an extension of an adventurer's body, so she was sure he must be very sad about the loss. Rudd replied that in any case they should call it a day, but before that he wanted to take some meat from the giant boar. The scene then shifted to the Miasma dungeon, on the 7th layer, where a group of adventurers was struggling against Miasma rats. After defeating them, they mentioned that these were a superior species known as Great Miasma rats, and they were tough opponents to beat. One of them said that, even so, the rats weren't a match for them. Suddenly one of the adventurers stopped talking, and the others asked what was wrong. He said it was nothing, he just thought he heard someone's voice coming from deeper inside. Another adventurer then asked why there would be a staircase in a place like that. They wondered if it could be a secret passage, and decided to check it out. Upon descending the stairs, they found a treasure chest. One of them said it didn't look like a trap, while another wondered what could be inside. When they opened it, they found a beautifully crafted sword. They were amazed, saying it looked incredibly powerful. They could even feel magic emanating from it. They figured they could sell it for a lot of money. One of them asked if it might be cursed, but another told him to stop being so pessimistic. After all, they hadn't seen the Miasma butcher for a long time and had been struggling without an easy way to make money, so maybe this was a blessing sent from the heavens to reward their hard work. They all agreed, saying they had been adventuring all night, so it was probably a blessing. However, one of them mentioned that he heard rumors about the Miasma butcher, that he was now traveling with a beautiful elf. The others laughed, saying he was full of himself and that next time they saw him they'd teach him a lesson and put him in his place. Still, the chubby guy in the group seemed uneasy about the sword. Before the scene ended, the sword whispered faintly, telling him to kill them all. The scene then switched to the frontier city of Bologna. Rode mentioned that regarding his new sword, he was thinking of asking for some advice from a blacksmith he knew. So he and Elysia went to a weapon shop run by a man named Dowan. Dowan examined Rode's broken sword and said that for a sword he had personally forged to break like that, brute force alone wouldn't be enough to cause such damage. He then asked Rode what he had imbued into the blade. Elysia whispered to Rode, asking if he was really going to tell him. Rode replied that he would explain everything. After all, he'd known the old man Dowan for a long time, and he wasn't the type to go around spreading other people's secrets. After some time, Red had explained everything, and Dowan said, "So eating monsters gives you abilities, huh? That explains why your power has skyrocketed." He didn't seem surprised at all by the information. Dowan said that as long as Red had good taste, he didn't care what he ate. What mattered now was that Red needed a sword capable of withstanding mana-infused strikes. Taking the research time into account, it would take a while before he could forge a new one. Rudy asked if there was anything he could do to help. Dowan said high-quality magic stones would be useful. Rude replied that he had a few materials with him and placed them on the table. Dawan was shocked when he saw them. They included stones from a lizard general, Baphomet, and even a minotaur. Dawan said that Rude's abilities had clearly improved a lot. Rude replied that it felt nice to be praised by the old man. Dawan told him that if he needed anything else he'd call Rud, and in the meantime Rud could use the spare sword he had. However, Dawan warned him not to imbue mana into that sword under any circumstances. If he broke this one too, he would charge him an absurd compensation fee. The scene then shifted to a bar where Elysia was already drinking again. She said that from now on they should try focusing on magical attacks. Rode said that old man Dawan got really scary when it came to his swords. Elysia laughed, saying that even though he was a bit intense, she was glad to have met Rode's first friend. Rode apologized for being such a loner. At that moment, the adventurers who had found the cursed sword approached them, saying it looked like they were having fun, and asked if they could join them, once again calling Rude the Miasma butcher. Elysia immediately stood up and asked if they had a problem with them. If they did, she said they should settle it like proper adventurers with a drinking contest. But suddenly one of the men began trembling. Out of nowhere, the man suddenly collapsed onto the table, leaving his friends shocked and asking what was happening to him. They soon realized that the one who had fainted was named Rondo. One of his friends asked if he had been drinking too much or something, but then noticed that Rondo was still tightly gripping the sword, the one surrounded by a red aura. He questioned why Rondo hadn't sold that sword yet. The sword, however, continued whispering to him, urging him to kill. Suddenly Rondo snapped. He shouted for his friend to shut up, and in a frenzy, attacked him, slashing his chest open without warning. Immediately after, Rondo turned toward Elysia and charged at her. Just as he was about to strike, Rud jumped in front of her, blocking the attack and saying that this wasn't going to end like a simple drunken brawl. Rud thought to himself that something was seriously wrong with Rondo. The other adventurers stood up, shouting, asking what the hell he thought he was doing, attacking people in the middle of their celebration. Several adventurers in the bar tried to restrain Rondo, but the sword cut through all of them at once. Then the sword, almost as if it had a will of its own, whispered that it was sorry for what was about to happen, but it would destroy everything in front of it. Elysia quickly cast a powerful spell at Rondo, blasting him through the wall of the tavern. The poor tavern owner watched in disbelief at the destruction, but Rondo stood up again completely unharmed, as if nothing had happened. Rod asked Elysia if she had held back during her attack, and she replied that an average adventurer shouldn't be standing after being hit by that kind of spell. Rondo then screamed that he would kill them all and charged again. Rod realized the situation was getting worse. Elysia called out to the others, telling anyone with healing magic to focus on the wounded. Meanwhile, Rod analyzed Rondo using his ability and discovered that he was under a madness status. He had entered a berserker mode, and compared to his normal self, all his stats were drastically higher. Elysia told Rod to move aside, saying that this time she would use her full power. She launched another spell toward Rondo. But to her shock, the sword absorbed it completely, nullifying her magic. She warned Rud to be careful, saying that the sword was clearly cursed. Rud then asked if Rondo was getting stronger by absorbing magic. Rondo's body began to distort, dark red tentacles spreading from him as he charged at Rud. Rud managed to block the blow, though it was incredibly strong. He countered with several strikes but noticed that the red tentacles were regenerating his wounds instantly. He thought to himself that if Elysia tried to support him with magic, the sword might absorb it again. If she really wanted to help, she'd need to find an opening and deliver one decisive strike. At that moment, the chubby adventurer, Rondo's friend, begged them not to kill him. He tearfully said that even though they had done terrible things to Rude in the past, for someone like Rondo, who had always been treated like a failure and despised by everyone, Magnus and Rondo's group had become his only place of belonging. The boy broke down crying, pleading for Rude not to kill his friend. Rude smiled and said he would do his best. He decided to try using his substitution skill and told Elysia to leave Rondo to him for now. She nodded in agreement. Rude remembered that when he used substitution on Elysia before, it took about 10 seconds. The problem was, how was he supposed to restrain Rondo for that long? Rondo struck again, and Rude barely managed to block in time. He noted that Rondo's attacks were incredibly heavy, but if he could just immobilize the sword somehow, it would help a lot. Rude then activated his basic earth magic ability, saying that this time the sword wouldn't be able to absorb it. He successfully immobilized Rondo and thought that if Rondo's madness was caused by a curse, he could try freeing him the same way he had restored Elysia's consciousness before. Rudd activated substitution and touched Rondo. Rondo screamed in agony, and for a moment it seemed like Rudd's ability was working. Rondo began crying, begging Rudd to save him. But the curse was far stronger than Rudd expected. He was soon overwhelmed and thrown back violently by the curse's backlash. Catching his breath, Rudd said he was fine, but his substitution had failed. It wasn't Rondo who had rejected the ability, it was as if the sword itself had a will of its own. Rudd realized he might need to weaken the curse further. He then activated his basic fire magic and launched flames at Rondo. The flames hit, and Rudd managed to remove the curse from Rondo's left arm. However, he noticed that Rondo's movements had changed, and more importantly, the sword had absorbed his magic once again. Watching closely, Elysia murmured that what they were seeing might be an incarnation, meaning that Rondo's body no longer belonged to him. According to the system, his name had changed to Two-Headed Curse. Grand the curse quickly charged toward Rod, but he managed to dodge just in time. The two clashed again, though Rod soon took a heavy blow to the face, realizing that the curse was far too fast. Not only was it fast, but its movements were sharp and efficient, just like those of a highly experienced warrior. While Rod was still processing this, the curse suddenly appeared behind him. At that moment, Elysia arrived, saving Rude from another devastating strike. She aimed at the curse's chest and unleashed a powerful spell straight at it. She then said that it seemed she would have to interfere a bit in this fight after all. Rude thanked her for saving his life and admitted he hadn't realized she could fight at close range. Elysia replied that a mage who becomes useless when the enemy gets close is nothing but a burden to the team. However, she added that their opponent was no longer someone they could afford to go easy on. She told Rude that he needed to make a decision right now. The curse had advanced too far. The only way to stop it was to destroy its heart. Rude hesitated for a moment, visibly torn, but finally nodded in agreement. At that same moment, Magnus regained consciousness. He asked what that girl Elysia had said earlier, wondering if he had heard correctly. The scene then returned to the battle. Rude thought that even with both of them fighting, they still couldn't create a decisive opening. He wondered if the creature's two heads allowed it to expand its field of vision. With that in mind, Rude asked Elysia to retreat for a moment. He then activated his fire magic once again. Elysia immediately understood his plan. If he used his magic to raise dust and debris, the curse wouldn't be able to absorb it. Using this cover, Rude appeared behind the curse and managed to strike it from behind. Right after that, Elysia summoned her earth spirit, calling forth the spirit Nomia. However, when she fired her spell, it barely managed to scratch the curse's arm. To their surprise, the chubby adventurer suddenly grabbed the curse by the arm and Magnus joined in to help him hold it down. They shouted that if they were going to die, then they would die together. Seizing the moment, Magnus drove his sword straight through Rondo's heart. The curse let out a final scream before dissolving completely, and Rondo's body collapsed lifelessly to the ground. Everyone stood there in silence, overcome with sorrow. Rondo's two adventurer friends fell beside his body, weeping in despair. Rudd quietly watched the sword lying near the body. He picked it up, saying that even if they hid it somewhere, there was no telling who its next victim might be. Immediately the sword began whispering again, telling Rudd to kill. Rudd, however, activated his abnormal status nullification, telling the sword to shut up. That kind of talk wouldn't work on him. At that moment, Lankar arrived at the scene, asking if everyone was all right. Ruj told him that the battle was already over. Taking in the situation around him, Lankar quickly understood what had happened. He ordered everyone to return to the guild and report every detail of the incident. Later in the guild, Lankar stated that the curse had increased the wielder's power significantly. With Magnus's testimony, the other adventurers were convinced of what had happened. He then asked Rude if he felt anything strange while holding the sword. Rude replied that thanks to his abnormal status nullification, the curse had no effect on him. As long as he was the sword's holder, there would be no more victims. Lankar acknowledged his resolve but warned that if the sword's curse ever took control of him, they would have no choice but to stop him. Rud interrupted, saying that when that time came, Lankar could do whatever he needed to. Lankar thanked Rud and Elysia for containing the incident and offered his condolences to Magnus and Rondo's friends. However, he said that no one would have time to rest yet. Elysia asked if something else had happened. Lankar explained that the adventurers under his command had originally been summoned for another reason. Recently, the number of monsters appearing outside the dungeons had been increasing at an alarming rate. It seemed that these monsters were coming from a newly discovered dungeon in Abalio. According to the research team's findings, the cause appeared to be the presence of a certain monster. Rudod asked what kind of monster it was, and Lankar replied, the Miasma dragon Basilista. He said he had only ever read about it in books, but its estimated level was around 70, which shocked both Rud and Elysia. Lankar went on to explain that its strength alone wasn't the real problem. The true threat was its dense concentration of miasma, which was said to provoke and empower other monsters, driving them out of the dungeon in greater numbers. Because of that, the research team had suffered heavy casualties, and those who survived were currently receiving treatment. He concluded by warning that if things continued this way, nothing would be able to stop the monsters, and the miasma would soon begin leaking out of the dungeon itself. And the damage caused would be catastrophic in the nearby areas. That's exactly why he went to them. He then says that he understands the situation, but Rud says that first he wants to be taken to the survivors of the research team. The scene then shifts to the medical wing of the Adventurers Guild, where Rud arrives at one of the survivors and activates his substitution ability. He removes the miasma from the survivor's body, which leaves Lankar deeply impressed by his power. Lankar says he didn't know Rud could nullify even the abnormal status of other people. Rud explains that he can only do it if the person he touches doesn't reject him. That's exactly why only he and Elysia will participate in the dragon hunt. Another adventurer says that it would be madness for just the two of them to go, but Lankar wonders what their chances would be. Rud explains that the fewer people he has to protect from the miasma, the easier it will be for him to move during the battle. He's also used to fighting alone against powerful opponents. Realizing there's no other option, Lankar accepts Rud's proposal and says he'll entrust the subjugation of the miasma dragon Basilista to them. The scene changes again to Rud and Elysia as they leave. Rud says they need to make sure they get a good night's sleep so they'll be fully prepared for the battle the next day. Elysia asks if it's really okay for just the two of them to go, and he replies that only this way will he be able to use his abilities without restraint. Without anyone nearby, things will be much better for them. He then apologizes to Elysia for dragging her into this battle, but Elysia asks what he's talking about. She says that if he had gone without her, she would have beaten him up right there, reminding him that they're a team and that the two of them together will be enough to save everyone. The scene then shifts to the lower levels of the dungeon. Reed is seen fighting some goblins that have been affected by the miasma. After defeating them, he says that just as the explorers reported, they still need to pass through at least 5 more floors, but they didn't mention that the miasma had spread this far. Elysia notes that this only shows how quickly it's spreading, and even their purification items are struggling to cleanse it. Rita says that the monsters on the next floors don't seem to be alive anymore. Elysia responds that they don't know how many more floors they'll have to go through, and even if Rude's attributes don't work against the monsters, she's confident she can land a few hits in close combat. She adds that if she were to run away again and leave a friend behind, she'd never forgive herself. Rude apologizes for making her say that again, then touches her shoulder, saying he'll use substitution to remove the miasma status from her. Rude mentions that he was prepared for this and can remove its effects each time he touches her shoulder, but as soon as he lets go, the miasma begins to build up again. Elysia then comes up with a plan, saying that they should just hold hands as they move forward. She also says that the miasma is so thick she can barely see her feet, so besides the substitution he should guide her as well. Rud agrees and the two of them continue through the dungeon hand in hand. They reach the middle floors where the miasma becomes even thicker. Ridge says he'll use his echolocation and detects 2 monsters ahead. He notes that if they manage to survive in this much miasma, they must be very strong opponents. Ridge comments that he has never seen monsters like these before. Elysia asks if there's any way to avoid them and he says yes, but if possible he'd like to face them. Alicia teasingly asks if he wants to eat them, and Rid, embarrassed, says that's not what he meant. He explains that it's because of his cursed sword Gran and he wants to test it before facing the Miasma dragon. It's then explained that Gran is a cursed sword that seals the consciousness of anyone who touches it, constantly driving them into a state of madness. At that moment, the monster's rolling beetles appear. Their abilities include Iron Body, Revolution, Poison Resistance, Miasma Resistance, and Paralysis Resistance. Rude uses his earth magic principles against them, and Alicia praises him for doing a great job, but it still doesn't seem to have much effect. The beetles then start rolling toward them at high speed. Rudd asks Alicia if she can stop them, and she says he can count on her, but she'll have to let go of his hand for a moment. She summons Nomia and creates a giant hand of earth to stop the beetle, though she says she can't hold it for long. Rudd says it's time to test his sword. He tells himself not to dare break it in his hand, then dashes forward at high speed and slashes the monster across the chest. He thought that the cut he had made was too shallow, and if it wasn't powerful enough he would have to take greater risks. He then gave a signal to Alicia, who immediately understood what he meant. She cast a wind spell on his sword, and the blade absorbed the magic. Rudd then asked the sword to show its true power, and with that he was able to slice through the monster as if it were nothing. Seeing the other monster behind him, he quickly finished it off as well. Rude then approached Alicia, praising her impressive magic control, to which she simply replied that everything had gone as expected. He took her hand again, reactivating his substitution ability. Rude then asked Alicia if he could take a little, since absorbing her magic hadn't restored his internal mana. Alicia, teasing him, said that in the end he just wanted to eat them after all. Embarrassed, he replied that he only wanted to cut them down and eat them later. In the next scene, he had already roasted some of the monster's meat and was eating it, commenting that the taste was rather unique. Alicia then asked how it felt to use the cursed sword for the first time. He said that as soon as it absorbed enough magic, his physical abilities increased dramatically. She noted that the most important thing was that the sword didn't seem to break even when he infused it with mana. Rudd replied that what concerned him was that according to eyewitness reports, the Miasma dragon was much larger than a tree, and he wondered how effective the sword would be against it. In terms of attack weight, his old sword was much better. At that moment the sword didn't seem pleased with his remark. It began to request something from Rudd, and he wondered if the sword also needed meat. However, the sword said no, it needed magic stones, and began asking Rudd to feed it some. He crouched down, picked up a magic stone from one of the beetles and offered it to the sword, which grabbed it with its eye. After absorbing the stone, the sword began to grow. Alicia then asked Rudd how he knew what to do, and he replied that she was the one who had told him. However, he wondered if she was upset because he had called her weak earlier. Still, he said that now that he understood how the sword worked, things would be much easier. Alicia then said they needed to go to the lower floors, where the Miasma dragon was last seen. Suddenly they heard a loud roar and wondered if it was the Miasma dragon. They soon realized the ceiling was about to collapse, so they needed to hold it up quickly with earth magic. Alicia warned that if they only focused on protecting themselves, the stairs would be blocked, and they'd lose the chance to fight the dragon. She then decided that before the collapse, they would dash through as fast as possible. She grabbed Rude's hand and activated her wind magic to propel them forward. They narrowly managed to cross that section of the dungeon. Rudd, smiling awkwardly, said he thought he was going to die, and Alicia, a bit embarrassed, admitted she used more magic than she expected. They noted that this floor was very dark, but Rudd said he could still use his thermal vision. He suggested they proceed slowly while searching for enemies. Rudd then sensed a creature on the other side and realized it was the Miasma dragon Besalista. The dragon was level 75, but its stats were incredibly high. It possessed a total of 18 abilities. Rudd noted that while its agility wasn't very high, its vitality exceeded 500. Alicia asked what abilities it had, and Rudd explained that it possessed venomous claws and fangs. At that moment the Miasma dragon noticed them. Alicia, panicked, asked Rudd what kind of magical resistances the dragon had. Rudd replied that it resisted fire, earth, and darkness. Alicia said she understood and would use other attributes, asking Rudd to take the vanguard position. The dragon roared, and Rudd said he was already on his way. He wanted to maintain some distance to analyze the dragon's attack patterns from afar, but with the miasma so dense, he didn't know how long Iskia could hold out. He decided he needed to finish the battle as quickly as possible. Suddenly the dragon launched a powerful attack toward Rudd, who barely dodged it by activating his instant step. Iskia noticed that the pillar and the floor melted from the impact. The dragon's heat was truly intense. She then activated her speed spell to support Rudd, greatly increasing his movement speed so he could strike the miasma dragon more effectively. After landing his first blow, Rudd realized that the dragon's hide was extremely tough. It had the dragon scales ability. He thought to himself that he wouldn't be able to cut through it with his sword, and the magic he used didn't seem to affect the dragon either. Iskia then began to cast her spirit magic. However, it didn't work either, and only caused a slight cut on the dragon. The dragon then swung its tail against a pillar, launching several stone spikes in their direction. Iskia activated her shield and Rudd used his iron body to defend himself. Rudd thought that the dragon had both strong defenses and long-range attacks, and he began to wonder how on earth they could defeat it. At that moment, Iskia asked Rudd to buy her some time. Before her magic weakened, she planned to use one of her special moves. Rudd nodded and said he understood. Iskia began concentrating, but the miasma dragon was already preparing to attack her again. Rudd quickly activated his earth magic principles, jumped high and struck the dragon's head with his sword. Iskia, realizing she would now be completely exposed, decided to trust Rudd with her defense. She needed to make up for that by putting everything she had into her attack. She summoned the spirit of fire, sound, the spirit of water, the spirit of earth, Nomia, and the spirit of lightning, Wakan. She then focused the power of all four spirits into a single massive attack. The dragon suddenly activated its dark magic principle and launched it directly toward Iskia. Rudd swiftly raised his sword to block the attack, allowing the blade to absorb all the magic. Iskia then shouted that she was ready and told Rudd to get out of the way immediately. She unleashed a powerful attack called Quintet of Spirits. However, the dragon simultaneously launched its own attack toward her and the two forces collided, causing a massive explosion. Iskia said that in the past she definitely would have been able to defeat it with a single shot, but this time the dragon was only left with a few wounds. Rudd touched her shoulder, activating his substitution ability, and told her that her attack was amazing, but now it was his turn. The dragon wasn't in good condition either. Iskia apologized for making him use substitution on her again and admitted she had used up nearly all of her magic in that last attack. Rudd told her to relax and use whatever magic she had left to protect herself because from that point on she could leave everything to him. She nodded and told Rudd to be careful before retreating to a safe distance. Rudd and the dragon faced each other, and the dragon let out a ferocious roar in his direction. In response, Rudd activated his own roar ability to try and intimidate it. He noticed that the dark magic the sword had absorbed earlier seemed to have infused it with a different kind of energy, and now he was overflowing with power because of it. He then struck the dragon's legs, noticing that its scales were starting to peel off, making it much easier for him to cut through. Rudd began attacking the dragon in several different ways, but he realized that the sword was becoming less effective. The mana it had absorbed was gradually running out. The dragon then activated its miasma wave ability and sent it toward Rudd. Although Rudd wasn't affected by the miasma itself, the shock wave pushed him back. Immediately afterward, the dragon launched more spikes at him. Rudd thought he wouldn't be able to dodge them and activated his instant step ability. However, the dragon was incredibly fast and appeared right in front of him, landing a direct hit. Thanks to his iron body and sword, Rudd managed to block the attack, but it was so powerful that it sent him crashing into a wall. Rudd realized something from that blow. Dragons truly were incredible creatures. However, his situation wasn't good. He was cornered. Iskia shouted his name, and Rudd thought back to the time he almost died in his battle against the Red Minotaur. But he told himself that this time was different. He activated his earth magic principle again, declaring that the person he was now was far stronger than before. He charged at the dragon once more just as it prepared to unleash a fiery breath. Rudd thought he could avoid the attack by using his web manipulation ability, but if he kept dodging like that he would lose in a battle of endurance, so instead he decided to use his webs like a sling. The dragon then launched a massive fire attack at Rud, who blocked it with his sword. He thought that while he couldn't do much about the intense heat, he could absorb the mana from the dragon's breath. If his fire resistance was high enough to withstand it, he could reinforce his sword again by combining that mana with the energy already stored within the blade, and release it all at once. Rud tried to endure the scorching flames as long as he could, but he was reaching his limit. Just then, Alicia activated her water magic on him, allowing him to withstand the dragon's intense heat. Rud, grateful, thanked her. Alicia split the dragon's attack in half, and immediately afterward Rud launched his own strike, cleaving the dragon cleanly down the middle. After Rud fell to the ground, having finally defeated the Miasma dragon, Alicia said she would cast a healing spell on him right away, but Rud told her not to overdo it, saying she had already pushed her magic too far. At that moment, Rud activated his blood drain ability, saying he could recover a bit by absorbing the Miasma dragon's blood. After absorbing some of it, he said it was time to take a break and asked Alicia to hold his hand so he could activate his substitution ability. She then lay down beside him and he said that the two of them had finally completed their mission. Alicia replied that yes, they did, but this was only the beginning. Rud agreed, thinking about an S-rank adventurer who was far stronger than he currently was. Rud told Alicia that they still had a long road ahead of them, but before anything else they needed to take some of the Miasma dragon's meat. After that, they ventured deeper into the dungeon. As they continued, they eventually came face to face with the core of the dungeon. Alicia said that even among adventurers very few people ever have the privilege of seeing one. If they used a magic circle inside the core, they would be able to return to the dungeon's entrance. Alicia explained that since unique materials could be obtained from dungeons that don't exist on the surface, it was common to leave the core intact even after clearing a dungeon. However, Rud pointed out that if they left it as it was, the Miasma dragon might one day be resurrected. Rud then reflected on the dungeon of Abalio, remembering that it was where he had faced the worst experience of his entire life, but it was also where everything began, where he opened the door to pursue his dream. He drew his sword, thanked the dungeon of Abalio for everything, and then sliced the core cleanly in half. The scene shifted to the Adventurers Guild, where Lencarse asked if there was any news about Rud's group. A woman replied that there was none, no report of their return yet. Lencarse thought about how people had started calling Rud the Miasma Butcher. In the world of adventurers, power was everything. Even if he tried to intervene, it wouldn't change anything, because life without strength in that world was harsh and unforgiving. Still, he thought that if this experience was enough to make Rud give up on his dreams, then that too would simply be another path he'd have to walk. At that moment, a man burst into the room, shouting that Rud and Alicia had just returned using the magic circle, both alive. He also reported that the subjugation of the Miasma dragon and the destruction of the dungeon's core had been successfully completed. Everyone in the room began to cheer, and Lencarse could hardly believe that Rud had actually done it. To think that he of all people would be the one capable of saving the city. Lencarse stood up, declaring that they needed to welcome them properly. After all, they were adventurers with the power to change fate itself. Rud and Alicia were greeted by all the adventurers, and soon after, the scene changed to Galar, the neighboring city of Bologna. There, a man was angrily shouting, "Damn that city of Bologna." He complained that just because they had so many dungeons, they went and destroyed the new dungeon without thinking. Now Galar's plan to claim ownership of that new dungeon was completely ruined. Another man asked the Lord if that wasn't actually a good thing. Since Bologna couldn't deny Galar's legitimate right to the dungeon, they had preferred to destroy it rather than hand it over. The Lord said that if they presented this version of events to Bologna, they could demand compensation for the profits they would have earned from the dungeon. He thought it would be better to profit that way than to challenge the dungeon themselves and risk losing adventurers in the process. However, he added that if they did that, the Adventurers Guild of Bologna wouldn't stay quiet. The other man smirked and said, "That's exactly what we want. We'll show that old man and his guild who really runs things here." The scene then shifted again, this time to a forest where Rud and Alicia were resting. As always, Rud was doing what he loved most, eating monsters. He had grilled a piece of Miasma dragon steak and was drooling, saying it looked absolutely delicious. Rude mentioned that the meat had been sitting in his bag for a while and now he could finally taste it. He took a bite and said it was amazing, that this was the flavor of dragon meat, which made every other meat he had ever eaten seem mediocre. The taste and sweetness of the meat were rich, and the fat melted in his mouth, blending perfectly with the deep flavor of the red meat. It was exquisite. While Rude was enthusiastically describing the flavor, poor Alicia was just sitting there, drooling. She then stood up and declared that it was decided tonight they were going to enjoy a gourmet dragon feast. Rude, however, replied that Rudd was already eating the meat, and Alicia, furious, shouted that he was being incredibly selfish. She told him they needed to head back soon and find a good restaurant nearby, so he should hurry up and finish eating. The scene then shifted. It had been 4 days since the destruction of the dungeon of Abellio, and Lankars apologized for calling them in so many times, saying this would be the last and that he promised. He explained that the raid report had finally been confirmed. Once again there was the reward for the two of them, about 1.5 million range, which left Rude completely stunned by such an enormous amount. Rudd asked if that was really correct, since it was far too much. Lankars explained that the average level requirement for the dungeon of Abellio was 70, so the reward was appropriate for someone at that level. Rudd was amazed to see so much money right in front of him. Lankars continued, saying that since they had managed to subjugate that dungeon on their own, there was no way Rudd could stay at rank D any longer. From now on his rank would be raised. Afterward they said their goodbyes, and Rude left. As he walked away he reflected that even though he had just recently been promoted to rank D, he had climbed up the ranks incredibly fast. His current stats showed that he was level 52, rank D. Alicia commented that even though he had fought monsters far above his level, his growth rate was still abnormally fast. She thought that normally once someone reached level 40 their leveling speed would slow down dramatically. Rudd smiled as he looked at Alicia, who didn't quite understand why. He then said he had finally surpassed her level. When Alicia opened her system, she saw that she was level 45 rank E, while Rudd was level 52 rank D. Feeling frustrated, Alicia said it wasn't fair. Rudd replied that it was strange for him too, even though his level was higher. When it came to combat power, hers was still much greater. Alicia agreed, saying that level was only an indicator. In the end, most of one's true strength came from skills and experience. While they were talking, several people suddenly arrived. One of them, a man, spoke arrogantly, asking if the Miasma butcher from the rumors was really standing before him. Rude frowned and asked who that man was, thinking he clearly lacked manners. The man introduced himself as the lord of the neighboring city of Golar, surprised that adventurers from Bologna didn't recognize him. Rudd realized that this was the greedy lord from Golar. The lord then demanded to know how Rudd dared to destroy their dungeon. Rudd calmly replied that, as far as he knew, the dungeon of Abellio belonged to everyone. The lord snapped back that the dungeon had been located on the border between Bologna and Golar, but those greedy adventurers from Bologna had used the excuse of something strange happening inside to claim it, cause a monster outbreak, and then destroy it completely. He continued, yelling that because of that, they had lost the profits they would have earned from that dungeon, and the monsters had caused damage to their territory. "How," he shouted, "are scum like you going to compensate us for that?" Alicia calmly asked the lord to settle down, saying that such matters should be discussed between guild representatives. As far as she knew, there had been no reports of monsters invading Golar's territory, and it had already been confirmed that Bologna's adventurers had brought the situation under control. Therefore, she said, they had no right to complain about anything. Rudd thought to himself that, as expected of an S-rank adventurer, Alicia had a real talent for words. At that moment, another man standing beside the lord smirked and said, "So it's true that the Emerald Storm, Alicia joined Bologna's ranks. Since her level has been consumed by the curse of the Abyss Dungeon, it makes sense for someone like her to join a weaker guild." Rudd immediately recognized the man. He was the guild master of Golar. The man sneered, saying this wasn't a matter for mere adventurers to interfere in. He stepped closer to Alicia and said, You're just a useless survivor from a group that died for nothing. Stop sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, you worthless trash." In that instant, Elisha released her wind aura, which immediately intimidated the guildmaster. He stepped back, shocked that he'd been overwhelmed by someone under level 45. Just then Lankurs appeared and ordered everyone to stop immediately. He said he would not tolerate fights inside his guild. He told the lord and the guild master to follow him. As they left, the guild master muttered that Lankurs should keep his dogs on a leash. Red, annoyed, muttered to himself, "What the hell is that guy thinking?" Then another voice called out to Elisha. It was an elf man asking if she remembered him. Rude groaned, wondering why people kept showing up one after another. Elisha looked at the man and said his name. Rebirth. The elf smiled and said, "So you finally remember me." Rude turned to Elisha and asked if she knew that man, and she replied that this man was from an old team Elisha used to be part of, and they often went on adventures together. The man said that back then he deeply admired Azuri trials, and he remembered how Elisha was able to control multiple magical spirits at once. Her way of fighting had always been flawless. Since he was also an elf, he couldn't help but see her as his inspiration. He went on to say that he knew how much she had suffered because of what happened in the abyssal dungeon, and that was exactly why he had come all the way to Bologna. Then taking Alicia's hand, he asked if she would like to join him once again. Alicia thanked him for the offer but told him that she was already part of a team. She then introduced Rude to him. Rude extended his hand politely, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. However, Ebert slapped Rude's hand away and said he had heard terrible things about what happened to Alicia in the abyssal dungeon, that she had been cursed there, yet to think that someone like her, a rank-is adventurer, would end up teaming up with a man known as the Miasma Butcher was unbelievable to him. He told her that if she joined his team instead, they could make the best use of her skills and experience. At that moment, Alicia pulled her hand away and told him to stop talking about things he knew nothing about. She said she chose to team up with Rudd of her own free will, and any insult toward him was an insult toward her as well. She thanked him for his concern but explained that the curse placed on her had already been lifted. Ebert was shocked, saying it was a curse from the abyssal dungeon, an SS rank dungeon, and that it had been cast by the dungeon's boss itself. But Alicia simply replied that she had been very lucky. Alicia then turned to Rudd and whispered that it would be a problem if his abilities were discovered. For now they needed to keep them secret. She told Ebert that they were actually on their way to update their adventurer ranks, and that Rudd was no longer rank D but rank C. Ebert was in disbelief. He couldn't understand why Alicia was treating him this way, especially after he had thought about her all this time. He insisted that the Miasma Butcher must have manipulated her. He said it was impossible for a rank D adventurer to have defeated the Miasma Dragon, and if Alicia's curse was truly lifted, then she must have been the one who actually defeated the dragon, not Rudd, who was just taking credit for her accomplishment. Rudd noticed the man staring at him with an intense, unhinged look. Alicia sighed and said that elves were often very proud beings, and that kind of pride usually turned into prejudice, a trait that only deepened with their long lives. She then asked Rudd what he thought about it, and he replied with a grin, "Well, you're an elf too, right? Does that mean you'll become a proud and prejudiced elf in the future?" Alicia smirked and said that she was a humble, intelligent, and charming elf. Rudd couldn't help but think that she was in fact quite proud herself. They then arrived at the Adventurers Guild reception desk. The guild receptionist greeted them warmly and said she had already heard everything from the guild master. She handed them some documents, saying that such an occurrence was quite rare. When Rude took his paper, he was stunned. He wasn't rank C as he expected, but rank B. The receptionist explained that he had managed to skip rank C entirely, going straight to rank B. Rudd and Alicia began celebrating their achievement, and the woman remarked that it only showed how difficult the conquest of the dungeon of Abellio had been. She also mentioned that they had received reports from the villagers Rudd and Alicia had saved, and that they had also considered the victory over Baphomet when determining his promotion. Rudd still couldn't believe he was now rank B. At that moment Rieg and Magnus appeared. Magnus said that if he were Rudd he'd be even happier. Everyone in the city was grateful to him, after all. Alicia smiled and told Rude not to be satisfied with rank B. reminding him that his goal was rank S. Rude agreed, saying she was right. His future was rank S. The two began to celebrate, vowing to keep moving forward and growing stronger. However, Ebert suddenly appeared again, interrupting them. He sneered, asking if they really thought that an idiot like Rudd would ever be allowed to reach rank Rus. He said that exploring dungeons required a specific rank, a rule put in place for the safety of adventurers. How, he demanded, could a man who just follows others have reached rank B? The Guild of Balano must be full of fools. The receptionist calmly replied that it didn't matter what he thought, ranks were assigned at the discretion of the guild. Magnus then asked if Ebert wanted to take back what he had said unless he wanted to get hurt right there and then. Ebert scoffed, saying that now he could see they truly were a bunch of idiots. Magnus, furious, grabbed him by the collar, but before Alicia could stop him, it was too late. Ebert threw Magnus aside with ease. Then drawing his sword, he drove it into the ground beside Magnus's face and shouted, "Don't you dare touch me with your filthy hands." Alicia immediately shouted for Ebert to stop. Just now he said that Alicia had always been too kind to people, to the point of even trying to help a deplorable man like Rude. Alicia then said that what he was doing was wrong, and Ebert replied that he already knew that very well. He said that elves were quite prejudiced and admitted that even he had difficulty changing his mind once he decided something. Smiling, he said that even he, a humble, intelligent, and charming elf, was not free from sin. Therefore, as a comrade of Alicia's race, he must show her the right path. At that moment, Rudda couldn't hold back and started laughing in his face. Both Alicia and Ebert wondered why Rudda was laughing. Rudda thought to himself that they were truly too proud. Ebert then said that incompetent adventurers were a danger to others, so he would test Rudda to see if he was truly worthy of being ranked B. The receptionist asked why he was deciding things on his own, but Alicia said it was fine. If he doubted Rudda's abilities, then he could see them for himself. At that point the scene shifted to the training area of the Bologna Guild. Alicia apologized to Rode because things had turned out that way, because of her. However, Rode said it wasn't her fault, it was due to his own incompetence as well. But he needed to defeat that arrogant elf as quickly as possible to prove himself worthy of being a rank B adventurer. Rode then said that in the end, adventurers could only silence others through strength. They both prepared for battle. Alicia stated that if either of them got injured, she would immediately stop the fight. With that, the battle began. Ebert rushed straight at Rudd, but Rudd managed to block the attack with his cursed sword. Ebert acknowledged that Rudd had at least some skill. He began striking repeatedly with his sword, and Rudd realized that Ebert was far more skilled in swordsmanship. He also remembered hearing from Alicia that Ebert used both offensive and enhancement magic in combat. Ebert was an arcane swordsman whose abilities included acceleration and physical reinforcement. Suddenly, Rude lost sight of Ebert. The elf was already behind him and struck Rude from the back. Rude thought that he couldn't keep up with Ebert's movements and wanted to use his abilities to counterattack, but he couldn't. Ebert said that rank B was a title reserved only for people with that level of power and asked if Rudd understood that. He declared that Rudd was not worthy of holding the rank B title, much less of standing beside Alicia. Rudd agreed that his current abilities did not make him worthy of being by her side, but it was Alicia who had believed in him. So he would prove to Ebert that he deserved to be by her side. Rudd then cast his earth magic and launched it toward Ebert. Ebert called him an idiot, asking if he really thought he could win that way. Their magic collided and exploded, and the other adventurers watching said they were going too far. Ebert said it was a pity for the Butcher of Miasma, showing the vast difference between their ranks. He then launched a powerful blue fire spell toward Rude, telling him to kneel before him. However, Rude blocked the attack with his sword, which absorbed all the magic. Rude said he knew Ebert would rely on magic. After all, elves were a proud race. Now that his sword was charged, Rude went on the offensive. Ebert realized that Rude's power and skill were on a completely different level than before, and asked if that sword was magical. Rude replied that he was wrong. The sword was cursed. Ebert commented that having a cursed sword made Rude even stranger and was just another reason why he wouldn't allow Alicia to stay with him. Ebert then activated his arcane swordsmanship skill, the lightning enchantment, and asked Rude if he could keep up with his speed now. He dashed forward and struck Rude in the stomach. The name of that attack was Lightning Palm. After electrocuting Rude, Ebert said the boy wasn't anything special and asked Alicia to announce the winner. However, Rude grabbed him by the collar and said that electricity didn't work on him because his paralysis status was nullified. Ebert said that was impossible. Rude should have been paralyzed by such a strong shock. Rude then headbutted Ebert in the face, knocking the elf to the ground, and placed his sword beside Ebert's face. Rude said that he had become tougher lately. Everyone began cheering, saying that it was over and that Rude had won. At that moment the scene shifted to Lancaris. He said that the feudal lord was already handling business in the capital, so he had been entrusted with the role of acting in his place. He then said that he understood Gullar's claims since they were in charge of management, and they intended to cooperate in the recovery efforts for the damages they had suffered. However, the lord said that he had already made himself clear. They wanted compensation, not cooperation. They demanded a fair amount of money for their losses from the dungeon. Litan said that they had grown greedy, taken more than they deserved, and would now have to pay the appropriate amount. At that moment a woman entered through the door asking for permission to speak. She said it was an emergency. Something strange was happening in the new dungeon of Abelau, which had previously been confirmed to be completely destroyed. The woman explained that the area around it was now covered by an unprecedentedly dense mana, with a concentration equivalent to rank B. Lankarsev said that it couldn't be possible, but the woman added that 2 gargoyles were guarding the entrance and blocking any interference from outside. Lankers told the visitors from Gullar that this was not the time to waste energy on useless disputes. However, the 2 guests were clearly displeased with the situation. Lankers then stood up and declared that they would organize a subjugation force and depart immediately for Abelio to investigate what was happening. He ordered that all adventurers ranked B and above be summoned immediately, including Rud. Soon all the adventurers gathered in front of Lankers. He explained that they had just confirmed the beginning of a dungeon cycle, and they would head to Abelio's dungeon at once to subjugate it as quickly as possible. Rudd then asked Alicia what a dungeon cycle was, and she explained that it was an event that caused a dungeon to evolve, something extremely rare. She said she had only heard of it happening a few times, and this time it was likely triggered by the dungeon's collapse. It was also her first time dealing with such a phenomenon. Alicia then wondered about the mana concentration around the dungeon being at rank B. However, Rude replied that since they were rank B as well and had rank A adventurers with them, it probably wouldn't be a problem. At that moment, Ebert appeared, saying that it was understandable for Rude to think that way, since he had only recently been rank D, but that he clearly didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. Rude asked what he meant by that. Ebert explained that if the mana concentration outside the dungeon was rank B, then the concentration inside would be at least rank A, and in the worst case could even reach rank S. He went on to say that based on what he had heard, the dungeon was continuously evolving like a chrysalis. As the chrysalis develops, the surface becomes flooded with mana. Since both Galar and Balana were located near the dungeon, there was a possibility that both cities could suffer catastrophic damage. Rudd became thoughtful about this, but Lankar told him not to worry. There had only been a few recorded cases of dungeon cycles, and many mysteries still surrounded the phenomenon, so it was quite possible that it wouldn't turn out to be that serious. Since Rude was the one who had completed that dungeon before, Lankar said they would be counting on him to guide everyone. The scene then shifted to the entrance of the dungeon, where the gargoyles stood guard. Rude began analyzing them and saw that they were level 50, with abilities including Iron Body, Petrifying Breath, Danger Sense, Miasma Resistance, Earth Magic Principles, Regeneration and Fire Resistance. Rude noted that they were slightly stronger than the rolling beetles he had faced before. Suddenly the gargoyles noticed their presence and charged at them. One of them unleashed its petrifying breath, but Alicia quickly activated Sylphid, causing both attacks to collide. The adventurers accompanying them were impressed by Alicia's power. When the other gargoyle attempted to attack the group, Lan Karsi punched it in the head, and the guildmaster swiftly decapitated the other one. Rudd was astonished by their strength, and Lankar said they needed to hurry. Rudd thought that the gargoyle looked somewhat edible, so he used his fire magic on its head. The guildmaster looked at him wondering what he was doing, and Rudd explained that the creature had regenerative abilities, so he was making sure it was dead. Secretly he kept a small piece of the gargoyle's meat for himself. As they entered the dungeon, Lancurse remarked that there didn't seem to be as much miasma as before and that the nature of the dungeon itself appeared to have changed. Rudd noted that the shape and layout hadn't changed much, but Alicia cautioned that they couldn't afford to let their guard down. They had no idea what was happening in the deeper layers of the dungeon. She added that even if the structure hadn't changed, the monsters certainly had, and they were likely much stronger than before. Just then, another group of monsters appeared. Lancurse said he would take on the larger dragon while the others should each choose a smaller opponent to fight. All the adventurers then prepared for battle. They activated their abilities and charged toward the monsters. Someone called out to Rude, telling him that they needed to help as well. However, Rude noticed that the system had notified him that his abnormal status nullification had been activated, and that the honor of the warrior effect was cancelled. Meanwhile, Lancurso was preparing to face the larger monster. Wielding his axe, he was ready for battle. The monster rushed toward him, but before it could even react, Lancurse struck it once, splitting the creature clean in half. Reed then realized that his abnormal status nullification also cancelled support magic, something entirely new to him. One of the adventurers said he would gather all the monsters together, activating his skill called Provocation. After doing so, he shouted that he would blow all of them up and that it was now time for the adventurers to strike. Ebert and another adventurer attacked the monsters simultaneously, finishing them off completely. The masked adventurer commented that the enemy's weaknesses couldn't be analyzed easily, so the best approach was to crush them with full power. Everyone then activated their magic and launched their attacks toward the monsters. However, another adventurer warned that his provocation ability was about to wear off and told everyone to be very careful. At that moment, another monster suddenly emerged from the ground and grabbed one of the adventurers. Before it could do any damage, one of the female adventurers swiftly cut off the monster's head. Homington said that her attack had passed dangerously close to his face and asked her to be more careful next time, but the girl just laughed at him. Rudd thought that everyone there was incredibly strong, but not only that, their teamwork was flawless. It was hard to believe they were just a temporary group. He realized that he wasn't contributing anything at all at that moment. Suddenly he noticed something move from one monster to another. They were parasites. Declaring that he could fight too, Rude activated his earth magic principles, but when he attacked, his spells seemed to vanish into thin air. Using his analysis ability, he discovered that the monster had an ability called earth removal. The guildmaster quickly decapitated the monster, saying that the best strategy was to cut off the parasites' heads, and scolded Rude for using earth magic on a creature that had come from the ground. He called Rude a complete idiot, and pointed out that he had even nullified the honor of the warrior buff. Rudd thought to himself that everything the guildmaster said was true. He had no experience working in such a diverse team, and he couldn't even benefit from the support magic of his companions. At that moment he felt like nothing but a burden. Ebert, trying to provoke him, asked if he was having trouble keeping up with the battle. He said that teamwork and coordination were essential for defeating powerful enemies, basic skills for any adventurer. Ebert added that Rudd might think he had won their last duel, but in the end he was nothing more than the butcher of Miasma, someone unworthy of being ranked. While he spoke, Alicia gave him a sharp, threatening look. Just then an explosion erupted behind the adventurers, and they asked if Lancurse was all right. He replied that he was fine, but more importantly, the creatures were parasitizing the bodies of their fallen comrades. Their wounds were regenerating, and their combat power was increasing. The guildmaster said that thanks to that, he only had to deal with one opponent now and offered to lend a hand in the fight. Suddenly something bit his neck, and when he killed it he saw that it was a small creature. He realized that the main purpose of those monsters was to inject venomous insects into their bodies. Soon all the adventurers were bitten and turned to stone. After everyone had been petrified, the monster prepared to finish them off. But at that moment Rude used his web manipulation to save Lancurse. His abnormal status nullification had protected him from petrification. He told his comrades to leave it to him this time. He used substitution on Alicia, saving her as well. After analyzing the creature, Rude saw that it was level 66 and noted that it didn't seem to have any troublesome magic resistance. He asked Alicia to use her magic to break the monster's stance, so he could attack afterward. Concentrating, he invoked Sylphid. launching a powerful strike directly into the monster's face, sending it flying backward. But then, in a rather disturbing manner, another monster emerged from between the creature's legs, leaving both Rude and Alicia disgusted. Suddenly, those new monsters began multiplying rapidly and charging toward them. Rude declared that this time he would blow all of them up at once, and then, activating his lightning cloak, Rude electrocuted all the monsters around him. While still petrified, Lancourse continued to watch everything unfold. The monster then charged toward Rude and Alicia, and she shouted that it was her turn to attack again. She struck the monster, launching it into the air, and told Rude that it was now his turn. Rude activated his instant step and rushed toward the creature. He attempted to slash the monster with his sword, but it managed to dodge the attack. Alicia warned Rudd to be careful, but before the monster could counterattack, Lancourse intervened, saving him. Rudd was shocked and asked how he had broken free from the petrification. Lancourse explained that he had circulated magic through his body and thanked Rudd for buying him time. He added that they needed to finish the battle as quickly as possible. Rudd then thought about infusing his sword with mana, and with one decisive strike he cleanly sliced off the monster's head. He realized that he was finally able to control and channel a stable amount of mana into his weapon. Alicia called out to him, and Rid replied that there was no way he would let that creature regenerate again. He activated his venomous stingers skill and fired them toward the monster. Alicia remarked that the poison was breaking down the creature's body faster than it could regenerate. It was a very potent toxin. She also noted that back during the battle with the Miasma dragon, things would have been far more dangerous if not for Rudy's abnormal status nullification ability. Lancourse then asked Rudd if he intended to reveal his secret to everyone. Rudd admitted that there was no way he could keep it hidden any longer, and that he wouldn't be able to leave without explaining everything. But first, he said, he needed to heal everyone using his substitution skill. After restoring everyone, Rudd explained exactly what had happened to him. Lancourse said that it was hard to believe, but after seeing Rudd fight earlier he could accept it. Ebert added that it was incredible. In all his long years, it was the first time he had ever witnessed such a miracle. Rudd pointed out that Ebert had just called him useless moments ago and said he wasn't even fit to be an adventurer. Ebert laughed it off, telling Rudd not to worry about such small details, and admitted that he now believed Rudd was worthy of accompanying Alicia. A red-haired girl asked if it was true that Rudd could actually eat monsters. Rudd pulled out 2 monster heads and said, of course, adding that if no one minded he wanted to cook a little. He began preparing the meat, explaining that first it needed to be cooked slowly over a low flame until the sides were well done, and then the strong odor should be neutralized with herbs. All the adventurers watched in astonishment. As Rude ate, they wondered if it was really possible. Holmington warned them not to be fooled by how appetizing it looked. Eating that could kill them. The guildmaster commented that it was a peculiar ability and noted that Rude seemed to restore his magical energy by eating. Rude corrected him, saying it wasn't magic but mana. The man was astonished. Rude's mana didn't emit the foul stench typical of demons. On the contrary, it felt almost divine. He then told Lancourse that they didn't have much information about the monsters in this dungeon and asked if they should retreat for now to call for reinforcements. Lancourse replied firmly that they would not. The longer they delayed, the more the dungeon cycle would advance. Since they were blessed with reliable comrades, they would conquer this dungeon on their own. If the topography hadn't changed, then they were likely close to the boss's chamber. They passed through a large door, and Rude remarked that, now that he thought about it, they had completely forgotten that part of the dungeon had collapsed. Lancourse noted that, even after coming this far, it seemed they had no choice but to turn back. However, Rude remembered the ability that one of the previous monsters had used. He activated earth and soil removal, clearing the blocked passageway. Everyone cheered, realizing that the boss chamber was just ahead. When they entered, they saw something glowing. A massive egg. The sight startled them. Lancourse identified it as the egg of the wise dragon. Rude, who knew nothing about it, asked what the wise dragon was. Lancourse explained that he had only read about it in books. It was a legendary dragon that cyclically transitioned between life and death. When its body was destroyed, its soul would reincarnate and be reborn using an egg as its incubator. Even if its body perished, its wisdom remained eternal. It was also said to understand human speech and to possess the ability to foresee the future. The adventurers remarked that, in the end, it was just an egg, so they could simply destroy it before it hatched. But Lancaris urgently told them to wait. At that very moment, one of the adventurers was struck by a powerful blow and sent flying. The group stared in shock as they realized the egg was moving. Lancaris wondered aloud if this was the egg's instinct for self-preservation. Lancaris ordered everyone to stay in the rear. It might just be an egg, he said, but it was still a dragon. Rudd then activated his analysis ability on the egg and discovered that it truly belonged to a level 1 wise dragon. However, the egg's status was completely obscured. One of the adventurers suggested that they should retreat for now and wait for reinforcements. The guildmaster disagreed, saying that once the egg hatched, no matter how many S-class adventurers they brought, they wouldn't be able to stop it. Lancaris declared that they needed to destroy the egg as quickly as possible and called for everyone's support. He instructed the group to aim for its legs while he charged forward, slashing everything in his path. However, as they cut through the egg's legs, they noticed that it was regenerating rapidly, faster than Lancaris could comprehend. He turned to Rudd and said he needed a favor. Shortly after, the egg let out a loud, piercing scream. Rudd nodded and agreed to help. Lancaris immediately rushed in again, cutting off all of the egg's legs once more, and the other adventurers joined in to assist him. When all the legs were severed, Alicia shouted that it was finally time. Rudd said he wanted to see if the egg could withstand his sword imbued with magic. Channeling power into his blade, Rudd slashed the egg cleanly in half. Everyone cheered. He had finally managed to split it. However, their celebration was short-lived. From the center of the egg, the dragon began to emerge. Alicia was shocked to see that the main body was still intact. She attempted to finish it off with Sylphid's power, but before her windblade could strike, the egg regenerated once again. The guild master said that their attacks were getting them nowhere. At that moment, everyone felt a chilling sensation as the egg began to glow. Fear spread through the group. Someone exclaimed that the wise dragon was about to be born. Lancaris shouted that they were out of time and had to end it immediately. They needed to destroy it with one overwhelming strike. He explained that their enemy's regenerative power was a major threat, but its tentacles were fragile. They would all need to attack together to create an opening. Everyone split up, each taking a position. Alicia and Rude said they would handle the left side, where several tentacles were advancing toward them. All the adventurers charged at the egg. This time, however, the egg retaliated in a new and more dangerous way. One of the female adventurers quickly created a magic barrier to protect the others. Ibert told everyone to focus on attacking while he maintained the defense. Lancaris then activated his charge ability by infusing his next attack with magic. It would deal double the damage. Alicia noticed what Lancaris was doing and wondered how they could coordinate to break the tentacles in time. Rude told her to leave that to him. He activated his command ability and asked if everyone could hear him. The adventurers were surprised, commenting that it was an interesting skill. It allowed him to communicate directly in their minds. Rude told them that once his countdown reached 1, they were all to strike the tentacles simultaneously. Everyone agreed. He began counting down, and when he reached 1, all the adventurers attacked at once, slicing through the tentacles. At that moment, Rudd signaled to Lancaris that it was his turn. Lancaris then activated his Absolute Void skill, unleashing an immensely powerful strike toward the egg. The attack was so strong that even the old guildmaster nearly fainted from the shockwave. The guildmaster admitted, though reluctantly, that they wouldn't have been able to defeat it without everyone's help. Rudder realized that the battle was finally over, and the group began to celebrate. However, behind the severed tentacles, the masked adventurer appeared. He said it was time to collect the wise dragon's magic stone and make a fortune. But after searching for a while, he couldn't find the stone anywhere. Suddenly, he was struck by a powerful attack that pierced straight through his chest. A monstrous figure emerged before them. It spoke, saying that its reincarnation had failed, but it had not been entirely in vain. The creature explained that its body wouldn't last long, but it needed to wait for the next reincarnation. Before that, however, it vowed to kill every single worm who had dared to destroy its rebirth. The guildmaster warned everyone not to celebrate just yet. He could still feel the monster's presence. Then the wise dragon Orpheus revealed itself before them. Everyone was stunned, wondering how it could still be alive. Alicia theorized that when they attacked it earlier it must have buried itself underground to escape. Orpheus spoke, saying that these lowly humans were defying the gods and calling them insolent beings. Red was astonished that the creature could speak. Lankersi explained that true dragons were ranked even higher than ordinary dragonkind. They were beings much closer to divinity itself. They were capable of understanding their language. The dragon then said that he could sense a hateful impurity within Rhoda. Although he appeared human, the dragon also saw him as a monster. Rising to his feet, the dragon called Rhoda forward, saying he would make him tremble in despair for his amusement. The girl who had been maintaining the barrier warned that she couldn't hold it much longer. She then activated her shadow mantle, which cloaked her in darkness and concealed her presence completely, disappearing from sight. At that moment, the dragon's arm suddenly fell off. The dragon looked at it in disbelief, realizing his body was beginning to deteriorate rapidly. One of the adventurers pointed out that the dragon was probably decaying, and Lankersi shouted that if they were going to attack, now was the perfect time. However, Lankersi thought to himself that he had just unleashed a powerful attack earlier and needed time to recover before striking again. Another adventurer panicked, asking what kind of monster this thing even was, admitting that he no longer had the strength to fight. He then said the only option left was to run and began to flee. The dragon laughed darkly and asked if the man really thought he could escape. With a sudden burst of power, he raised several stone pillars, blocking every exit and trapping the adventurers inside. "No one will escape me now," the dragon declared. "Even with one arm I can still exterminate a few rats." Lankersi then said that if they couldn't run they would show the dragon just how terrifying those rats could be. All the adventurers charged toward the ancient dragon at once, but to their horror none of their attacks had any effect. It was as if the dragon could predict every move they made. The dragon laughed mockingly, asking if that was all they had and demanding that they entertain him more. He then activated his cell breaker ability, striking all the adventurers simultaneously. The impact sent everyone flying. The dragon turned to Rhoda and asked if he was hurt. Rhoda replied that he was fine, but admitted that he had used almost all of his mana in the last battle. Alicia then said she would finish it in an instant with her most powerful spell, the Five Spirits Strike. Through Rude's communication ability, she warned everyone to clear the area immediately. She told them to synchronize with her attack and dodge at the right moment. Focusing intensely, she called upon her spirits for aid. After gathering all her power, Alicia shouted for everyone to fall back as quickly as possible and unleashed her ultimate attack at the dragon. The explosion was blinding, and everyone held their breath, wondering if it had worked. But when the smoke cleared, the dragon was still standing. It had blocked her strongest spell with just one hand. The dragon smirked and said that he had been careless for a moment, but had corrected his mistake. Just then Lankersi appeared above him, ready to decapitate the dragon. But with a swift movement of its tail, the dragon struck Lankersi, sending him crashing into the ground. Another adventurer tried to restrain the dragon with magical vines, while Ebert attacked from behind. However, the dragon bit down on Ebert's sword with its jaws and shattered it effortlessly. Ebert was stunned. He had aimed for the dragon's blind spot, but his strike had been completely useless. The dragon mocked him, asking if he really thought such a weak attack could stop him, then unleashed a massive counterattack that struck everyone at once, defeating them all. Alicia fell to her knees, horrified as she watched her comrades fall one by one. Memories of losing her entire party in a previous dungeon flooded her mind. "Not again," she whispered, trembling. "I can't lose them again." The dragon loomed over her, declaring that he respected her courage, but she would now be annihilated and become nourishment for his wisdom. Reb then forced himself to his feet, realizing they couldn't win this fight. He suggested that if they could just stall the dragon long enough for the others to escape through the mana circle at the dungeon's core, they might survive. Reb attempted to activate his web manipulation ability, but it failed to trigger. Confused, he wondered if he had completely run out of mana. Meanwhile, the dragon continued his relentless assault, overwhelming the remaining adventurers. Reb thought to himself that if this continued, they would all be slaughtered. He glanced beside him and noticed the corpse of the slimy monster from earlier. At that moment the dragon inhaled deeply and unleashed his dragon breath toward everyone. To block it, Alicia summoned Sylphid's power to create a barrier of wind. The guildmaster joined in, using his aerial blade attack to support her, but the dragon shielded itself using magical processing and then countered with water bullet and air slash attacks. They were growing frustrated. The dragon's constant switching of abilities was unbearable. The dragon taunted them again, saying they hadn't seen anything yet, and then conjured a blade made of pure electricity. The adventurers stared in shock, wondering what kind of attack that was. Could it be similar to Lancurs's Void Strike? So this was the power of a dragon's wisdom. The guildmaster shouted that while the dragon was charging that attack, it would be defenseless. If they were going to strike, now was the time. Alicia said she would cover them while they attacked. She summoned Ardal, and Ice also imbued water and lightning into her Aqua Thunderblade. Ice then passed that power to the guildmaster, who charged forward to strike the dragon's head. However, as he got closer, he realized it was a trap and the dragon pierced his chest, impaling him completely. The sight left Alicia deeply traumatized once again. Immediately after, the dragon reached out and seized one of Alicia's spirits. A spirit? The dragon muttered, intrigued. How rare, I wonder what it tastes like. Alicia, horrified, begged him not to do it, but Ardell was already inside the dragon's mouth, and within seconds, the dragon devoured her, destroying one of Alicia's beloved spirits. At that moment, Alicia's mind shattered. She fell to her knees, muttering that this couldn't be happening again. The dragon coldly explained that charged techniques should only be used against powerful opponents. That way, he said, you create an opening and strike with overwhelming force. There's no need to waste such a technique on mere rats. He then looked at Alicia and asked if she knew why he had used such a deceitful tactic. Smirking, he said, I wanted to see the despair in your eyes. Then, with a chilling grin, he added, now I wonder what an elf tastes like. As he lunged forward to devour Alicia's head, Rude suddenly rammed into him with full force, knocking the dragon back. But something was different about Rude. His appearance had changed completely. When the scene shifted back to the dragon, Rude's attack had deformed its face, tearing out one of its eyes. Furious, the dragon roared that its body was failing him and in desperation, consumed the remains of its own eggshell. Its form mutated into something monstrous. Rude could feel an enormous surge of mana coursing through his body, but he couldn't control it. Ice asked if he was all right, but Rude couldn't respond. He had lost control and suddenly lashed out, attacking Alicia by mistake. The dragon laughed mockingly, saying Rude had absorbed so much mana that he had turned into a monster himself. Fascinating, the dragon said, but you won't last long in that state. You're not even worth my time. Rod's body burned as his consciousness began to blur. He felt as though he was slowly going insane, realizing his body wouldn't last much longer. Just then the adventurer who had disappeared earlier reappeared and said, your mana control is a complete disaster. She then placed her hand on Rud's back and added, let me give you a little help. At that moment Rude felt a strange energy flow into his chest. No way, he thought. Then suddenly, his mana aligned perfectly with his body in complete harmony. Even the dragon couldn't believe what it was seeing. The mysterious woman handed Reed a sword and said, finish this, send that overgrown lizard back to its grave. Still shaken and confused, Reed asked who she was. The dragon, enraged at being called a lizard, roared, do not underestimate me, and charged at them furiously. The woman mocked him, saying, what's wrong? Can't take a little joke, you bookworm dragon. As the dragon lunged at her, Rode stepped in front of her and with astonishing ease cleaved the dragon cleanly in half with his sword. Rode then rushed to the guildmaster and used his web manipulation to perform emergency first aid. However, the guildmaster told him the wounds were too deep to heal. The mysterious girl remarked that only the two of them were still standing. Everyone else was gravely injured. If we don't treat them soon, she said, carrying this many people out of here will be nearly impossible. She wondered aloud if they should wait for reinforcements, or carry everyone back to the city one by one to find help. But just then Rid felt a sharp pain in his chest. The girl frowned and said, Looks like the side effects are finally kicking in. She explained that she had forcefully stabilized his mana to strengthen him, but it seemed his body had reached its absolute limit. Suddenly, the dragon who they thought was dead began to move again. "Damn you," it growled. "You won't leave here alive. At the very least, I'll drag someone down to hell with me." The entire dungeon started to shake violently as debris began to fall from above. The girl shouted that the dragon was acting as a substitute for the dungeon's core and they needed to escape immediately. As they ran, massive stones began collapsing from the ceiling. One of them was about to crush Alicia. Rudd rushed forward, shielding her with his body. When Alicia regained consciousness, she found herself in Rudd's arms. He smiled weakly and said, "I did it. I defeated the wise dragon. Now we just need to get out of here." Alicia nodded, but looked pale and unsteady. Rudd asked if she was all right, and she admitted she couldn't move. She had completely run out of magic. Smiling faintly, she asked Rudd to leave her behind and save himself. Rudd's expression darkened. "What kind of nonsense is that?" he shouted. Furious, he thought to himself that everything happening now, all this destruction and suffering, was because it was his fault. The girl then shouted that if they didn't hurry, they would all be buried alive, but Rudd refused to leave, saying he couldn't just run away and abandon everyone there. The girl sighed and said she really liked Rudd, but it seemed he had made the wrong choice. Rudd thought that if things continued like this, they would all be crushed to death. At the very least, he could carry Alicia and escape, but then he hesitated. Could he really abandon everyone else? After thinking for a moment, he decided he couldn't do it. He began desperately searching for another way to save them all. Barely conscious, Alicia begged Rudd to run away as fast as he could, but he refused, saying he would never abandon her. Alicia shouted at him, telling him to go. "That's what my comrades would have wanted for me," she cried. Landkurs then spoke up, telling Rudd to flee as well. He said that if Rudd planned to continue living as an adventurer, there would be times when he'd lose his friends, and if those who can survive don't live. Landkurs said, "Then what meaning do the deaths of those who fell in battle have?" To make matters worse, more monsters began appearing. Ebert, struggling to his feet, warned that the dungeon's creatures were gathering, but Rudd stood firm, shouting that no one was going to die there. Alicia kept pleading for him to leave, but Rudd charged forward, slashing through the monsters in front of him and screaming that he would never run away. He shouted that everyone had always called him the Miasma Butcher and looked down on him his entire life, but when Alicia invited him to join her party and accepted the dark secret he carried, he felt truly happy for the first time. And when the guild welcomed him too, he felt even happier. With friends who trusted him and finally recognized his worth, he could never abandon them in that dungeon. Rudd then remembered the S-rank adventurer he had once met. The man had told him to listen carefully. No matter how hard or painful life became, he must never give up. Remembering those words, Rudd fought on with everything he had, cutting down the monsters one by one. But the dungeon was collapsing fast. Then suddenly, parasites began latching onto the dragon's body. Still, Rudd was determined, shouting that he would never give up. At that moment, he had only one choice left: to activate his auto skill. As he did, Rudd lost one of his arms. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed his sword with the other hand, and to everyone's shock, his lost arm regenerated almost instantly. He then charged straight at the dragon, driving his blade deep into its abdomen. Immediately after, he activated his lightning mantle, declaring that this time, the dragon would fall for sure. The dragon roared in fury, vowing to annihilate everyone, and struck Rudd with a powerful blow, sending him flying across the battlefield. But just as he was about to crash into the ground, someone caught him. When Ree looked up, he was stunned. It was the S-rank adventurer who had saved him when he was a child. The man smiled and said, "You did well, kid. Now you can relax. Everyone's going to make it out alive." The man named Hamido turned toward the dragon and said, "You failed to reincarnate properly. On top of that, you were parasitized by dungeon monsters. How disgraceful for a so-called wise dragon." The dragon in rage tried to trap them both with thick vines. Rudd panicked, saying it wasn't good, but the S-rank adventurer sliced through the vines effortlessly and blocked the dragon's next attack with just one hand. He then asked the dragon, whose name was Orphsifs, if he remembered him and the life-or-death battle they had 5 years ago. Back then, he said, in your divine form, you pushed us to our limits, but looking at you now, you've fallen so low. The dragon roared in anger, shouting for him to be silent. But before Orps could even react, the S-rank adventurer sliced him cleanly in half with a single strike. Rud was in awe of his strength, so this is the true power of an S-rank adventurer, he thought. Meanwhile, debris was about to collapse onto Alicia. Suddenly a wave of freezing energy filled the air. A woman had activated frozen winter, sealing the collapsing ceiling in solid ice and stopping the debris from falling. Rudd blinked in disbelief. Ice. The entire collapse just stopped. Moments later a woman appeared and asked in disgust, "What kind of bizarre monsters are these? I'm starting to get sick just looking at them." The S-rank adventurer smiled and said, "Thanks, Selena." The woman, Selena, crossed her arms and replied, "Leos, you're as reckless as ever. Charging in like that." 2 more male adventurers arrived soon after. Selena then noticed Alicia and gasped. "Alicia, it's been so long," she said, running toward her and hugging her tightly. Alicia looked just as shocked. Selena frowned, saying Alicia looked terrible, and called to one of her companions to hurry and heal everyone. He immediately cast Holy Light of Restoration, bathing the entire dungeon chamber in radiant energy. Everyone's wounds began to close, and the pain faded away. Ebert was amazed by the spell's range. "Incredible, his healing magic covers such a wide area," he said. The healer then moved toward the guildmaster, continuing his healing to ensure everyone would recover completely. He was in the most critical condition, so the healer activated the soul restoration seal. He said that he had already healed everyone's wounds, but they were still completely drained of stamina and magic. He told everyone to rest for a while, but added that he couldn't revive those who had already lost their souls, meaning one of the adventurers had died. Leonez then said that everyone would leave the dungeon immediately and that those who couldn't walk should lean on someone for support. Everyone began to exit the dungeon, relieved and happy to be alive. Rudd, however, looked back at the remains of the monsters scattered across the floor. The scene then shifted to a forest where they had set up a small camp. One of the adventurers held something in his hand, a fragment of the dragon soul of Orps. He explained that it would likely regenerate over several years and eventually revive. He continued, saying that the Wings of the Light Lion group had defeated Orps 5 years ago and the dragon soul fragment had been safely stored in the royal capital. Lankurs then asked why Orps had managed to resurrect in such a remote town like Bologna. The adventurer explained that the royal vault had recently been robbed, which clearly shocked Lankurs. He went on to say that Orps's resurrection this time was caused by an artificial anomaly inside the dungeon, created by someone deliberately. Selena sighed, saying it was a shame. If Alicia had joined the Wings of the Light Lion, our strength would have been equal to an entire army. Alicia replied that her level had dropped considerably, and that she had different goals now. The battle had made her realize how weak she still was. Selena smiled and said, "You've always been stubborn, Alicia. Once you decide something, you never change your mind." Alicia thanked her for the offer and the kind words. Selena then joked, telling her to at least come see the members of the Wings of the Light Lion sometime. "We've got a selfish leader, a muscle-headed idiot who barely speaks, and a 2-meter-tall nerd. There are way too many men in that group. It drives me crazy." Leonez told her to quiet down, saying she was talking too much and making Alicia's partner uncomfortable. Rudd then stood up and said that something had happened in a village east of there when he was a child. No one understood what he meant until he explained that Leonez had been the one who saved his life. Reed said that Leonez might not remember it, but that day he became his hero. Leonez smiled and said, "So you were that little boy I saved back then? I see now you never gave up." Selena laughed softly. "So this is the kid." Leonez always said he wished they could have arrived earlier that day to save more villagers. He's regretted it ever since. The healer added, "That's exactly why he's so reckless now. He's always causing trouble for the rest of us." Leonez chuckled and said that thanks to Rude, the effects of the dungeon anomaly had been neutralized. "You've become a fine adventurer," he told him. Rudd humbly replied that he didn't deserve such praise but still thanked Leonos for his words. Lantkaris then said that considering the recent chaos in the capital and Bologna's need for stronger defenses, he was planning to form a new city guard unit and asked if Rudd would like to serve as its captain. Rudd was surprised and honored but ultimately declined the offer. Lantkaris respected his decision but asked for his reason. Rudd explained that during the dungeon conquest he realized just how unprepared he truly was. Without more strength, he wouldn't be able to protect his friends. Turning to Leonos, Rudd said he became an adventurer because he deeply admired the kind of person Leonos was. He admitted he was still far from reaching Leonos' level, but he was determined to grow stronger and one day he wanted to fight alongside him. He then looked at Alicia and said that someday they would conquer the Abyss dungeon together. Alicia smiled warmly and said she couldn't wait for that day, calling Rudd her partner. Lantkaris sighed, saying he could see that both of them already had their own goals. Rudd added that he was planning to leave Bologna soon, and embark on a new journey to further improve his abilities. The healer, intrigued, remarked that Rudd's energy was fascinating. Unlike any conventional magic, he explained that Rudd's magical essence had somehow taken root in his human body, something that should have been impossible. He then asked, almost hesitantly, if Rudd had ever eaten monsters. Everyone froze in shock. Selena immediately ordered everyone to stand back, saying Rudd was dangerous. She raised her hand, preparing to attack him with her ice magic, demanding that he answer truthfully, and warning that depending on his answer she would kill him on the spot. But the healer quickly intervened, telling her to calm down. He then trapped her inside an earth prison to stop her from attacking. Furious, Selena shouted, asking why he had done that. "Eating monsters is the greatest taboo of all," she yelled. Then Rudd finally spoke. He was considered untrustworthy. Hamadal said that Rudd seemed to be special since he didn't show any signs of monstrification. To be more precise, there were no traces of darkness within his magical essence. However, he still didn't understand the reason behind it. Ladriones then apologized to Rudd for Selena's rudeness, explaining that they were currently tracking down the thieves who had stolen from the royal vault. Based on the residual magical essence left behind, they suspected that monsters were somehow involved. Because of that, they asked Rudd to explain his situation in detail. The scene then shifted. Rudd had already explained everything. Leonis said, "So that's how you survived the poisoning, thanks to your status nullification ability." He noted that it was a very rare skill. Another adventurer agreed, saying it was the first time he had ever heard of such an ability, but now everything made sense. Selena commented that Rudd was the one who had dispelled Alicia's abyss curse, even though she had almost killed him afterward. Rudd simply smiled and said it was fine since he understood her reaction. One of the adventurers asked Rudd if, after eating monster flesh, he could replicate their abilities. However, he added that even if Rudd ate the flesh of an aquatic monster, that didn't necessarily mean he could breathe underwater. Leonos then said that Rudd could indeed gain the monster's abilities but not their physical traits. He turned to Alicia and asked if she had ever eaten any kind of monster with Rudd. Alicia quickly replied, "Of course not. I would never eat a monster, not in a million years." Little did they know she was secretly curious to try one. Leones continued, saying he had been thinking if someone other than Rudd ate a monster, they might absorb its essence and potentially gain its abilities as well. Alicia was shocked and said that what he was suggesting was insane. For starters, eating monsters is a taboo. If you eat one, you could end up turning into one, she said. Leones calmly replied, "That's why we could use substitution magic, to possibly reverse the transformation." His words left everyone stunned. But Rudd shook his head and said it wasn't possible. "There are only two outcomes for those who eat monsters," he said. "Either you turn into one or you die." One of the adventurers muttered that he understood now, instead of transforming into a monster you could simply die from it. Rudd explained that the first time he ate a monster, a massive surge of mana had erupted inside his body, causing him to lose all control over himself. Back then he had been driven by an overwhelming desire for revenge against those who had betrayed him. That rage had kept him moving forward. He added that only now were the side effects of absorbing that mana finally starting to fade. The healer noted that Rudd's body must have adapted to the magical essence. Rod then said there had been one time when substitution had failed completely. Leonos nodded and said he understood there was still so much they didn't know about mana. Another adventurer agreed, saying it was something too dangerous to play around with. Leones then asked Rod if he could demonstrate his abilities, saying that while he understood the theory, there were still many mysteries about mana that needed to be explored. If we really want to understand mana, he said, we should speak through our swords. After all, we're all adventurers here. The scene shifted again, this time showing a group of unicorn rabbits in a meadow with the adventurers preparing to hunt them. Shortly after, the scene cut to Rude cooking the unicorn rabbits over a fire while everyone watched him closely. Selena complained that it was a bit unfair. They had to use items or rest to recover their magic, but Rod could just eat to restore his. Alicia commented that it was incredibly convenient to regain mana simply by eating. Both women watched hungrily as Rud ate his meal. After finishing, Rude smiled and said, "That was great, thanks for the food," adding that his mana was now fully restored. Leonars asked if he was feeling okay after eating that. Rude assured him there was nothing to worry about, in fact he felt better than ever. Just then, a portal appeared before them. It was said that the secret garden transported those who entered into a space filled with pure plant essence, a place where no outside interference was possible unless the user allowed it. They told Rud he could enter, and as soon as he stepped through the portal he found himself standing in a breathtaking landscape. "No one can disturb us here," someone said. Rud tested the area by launching a fire spell at the grass, but nothing happened, not even a burn mark. "Looks like we can fight with everything we've got," he said. Leones removed his cloak and said, "I'll start. Don't hold back, Rud." Rud activated his morphic slash and unleashed a powerful wind attack toward Leones. Excited, Leones grinned. "So you're starting with the morph ability, huh? That means you really can use the powers of the monsters you've eaten." Leonos deflected the attack easily, but Rude immediately followed up by activating his spider web skill. However, Leonos sliced through it effortlessly and asked. He had everything the boy could offer. However, suddenly he noticed a strange smoke drifting toward him. He immediately recognized it as a paralyzing breath. Rudd appeared behind him, attempting to strike, but Leonins quickly blocked the attack, saying that Rudd was far too naive. "With half-baked tactics like that, you won't even scratch me," he said. The two began clashing swords fiercely. Leonis told Rude that he relied too much on his abilities, which made all his attacks shallow and predictable. Rude was shocked that the paralysis hadn't worked on Leonis, but Leonis explained that it had. "It's just that high-ranking adventurers have strong resistance to status effects." Rudd then activated his iron body, but Leonis struck him in the chest with a heavy punch. Leonis said, "Many monsters have resistance to negative status effects. Don't rely too much on your abilities, Rudd." Rudd had activated his instant step and dashed toward Leonos, but Leonos countered with a kick straight to Rudd's face. Even so, Rudd stood up again, channeled mana into his sword and used Rabbit Leap to gain more momentum. Leonids recognized it immediately. It was the skill of the rabbit Rudd had eaten earlier. "You're really skilled," Leonids said. "I have to admit it." Rechton unleashed a powerful slash, but when the smoke cleared, Leonos had already overpowered him, saying, "You won't land a hit on me with such a wide, unrefined strike. Monster abilities can be powerful, but your swordsmanship is still lacking. That last move might work against huge monsters, but against a human it's nearly useless." He helped Rudd back to his feet and asked if he had ever heard about technique. "The circulation of mana through your body enhances your physical abilities," he explained. At that moment, Rudd remembered that feeling. He focused and managed to circulate his mana properly. Leonos smiled and said, "You learn fast." Excited, Rudd asked if he could spar with Leonos once more. Leonos, equally thrilled, said, "Of course, come at me with everything you've got this time." One of the other adventurers laughed, amused by how fired up the two were. After a while of intense sparring, they both took a break. Rudd said, "As expected of an S-rank adventurer, I couldn't even land a single hit." Levelunas replied, "But with your variety of abilities and versatility, you managed to pressure me several times." Overjoyed, Reach thanked Leo, saying that during their fight, Leos, had constantly pointed out his weaknesses and bad habits, so in a way he had been training him. The large adventurer nearby chuckled, saying that Leos was just being weird as usual. Lenones himself seemed puzzled. I don't remember saying anything special, he said. Rude thought to himself that it was the first time he had ever heard that man speak like that. Then another adventurer brought up Rude's habit of eating monsters and warned him never to tell anyone else about it. If the royal capital finds out, you'll be executed, he said. Rude was stunned. Hamato explained that the closer one got to the royal capital, the greater the influence of the church. To them, the holy scriptures were sacred, and within them consuming monsters was considered the gravest sin of all. Rid tried to argue that his abilities nullified the negative effects, but the adventurer shook his head. Even so, going against the scriptures is a sin. Those self-righteous clerics would never understand your side. He then asked Rude if anyone besides the adventurers who had joined the dungeon expedition knew about his secret. Rude replied that no one else did. After all, it was a taboo. He had only told Alicia, but then he remembered there was one more person who knew: the old blacksmith, Dun-en. The scene shifted to show Doan holding a massive sword, proudly saying that after years of research, he had finally done it. The scene then transitioned back to Bellana inside the dwarf's workshop. Doan said he didn't care about what others ate. That wasn't his business, but he told Rude not to worry, assuring him that he wouldn't tell anyone about his secret. Then, frowning, Doan said the real problem was that Rude had ordered a custom sword but now claimed he didn't need it anymore. Realizing his mistake, Rude immediately apologized for the cancellation. Doan, still angry, said, I forged a sword that won't break even when you channel mana through it. Do you have any idea how difficult that was? After all that effort, you tell me you don't need it anymore. Rudd could tell how furious the dwarf was, and Alicia whispered that, of course, Dawn had every right to be angry. Deln then looked at Rudd and asked, can you do me a favor? Rudd, feeling guilty, said, anything. With his cheeks slightly red, Dunn said, then, can I touch your sword? Rude blinked, confused. Huh? The situation suddenly felt a little awkward, almost suspiciously so, but he decided to go along with it anyway. Embarrassed, Rude said that he couldn't let Dawn touch his sword. He explained that his sword was very large, extremely powerful, but also cursed, and it drove anyone who touched it insane. Din replied that Rude hadn't complained when he insulted his craftsmanship earlier, so the boys should listen to his request, especially since Rude himself had said he could ask for anything. He also mentioned that he had heard Rude could cure negative status effects. However, Rude warned him that it was far too dangerous. If he lost consciousness while touching the greatsword, the substitution ability might not work properly. Dune simply said that he didn't care about that. If I lose control, just cut me down, he said calmly. Rot thought to himself that the old man was completely insane but agreed, saying it was fine since Dune was so determined. Alicia asked if he was really serious about that. After all, she thought she was the only one allowed to touch his sword. Dune explained that he had been a blacksmith for many years, but he had never seen a weapon capable of absorbing magic or mana like that one. It was worth taking the risk. Rode reluctantly handed the sword to Dobbin. The old blacksmith was instantly mesmerized by what he saw. He said the metal of the sword wasn't normal, and the darkness contained within its icy blade seemed almost alive. The madness and beauty of this sword coexist perfectly. He whispered, I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. Dune gazed deeply into the blade and realized it truly was alive. One day, he said with awe, I'll forge a sword like this myself. But at that very moment the sword began to influence Doan's mind, whispering to him, telling him to kill everything in his path. Suddenly Doan had a vision of Grand Spirit holding a blonde-haired woman. Rod quickly snatched the sword back from Doan and activated his substitution ability. He asked the old man if he was all right. Doan, now pale and sweating, nodded and apologized for being so selfish in asking to touch it. Still shaken, Dunn wondered aloud what kind of illusion he had just seen. Then regaining his composure, he said, Don't worry, boy, I won't say anything that could hinder your journey, but mark my words, one day I'll forge a sword that surpasses even this one. The scene then shifted to a carriage gently rolling down a road. Rode leaned back and said that it felt incredibly relaxing, but that renting it had been a pretty bold move. Alicia laughed and said that she had been hunted constantly over the past few years, so it was good to relax every once in a while. Rud smiled and mentioned that soon Sylphid and Nomia would be guiding the carriage. Alicia teased that while she could probably find someone else to guide it, considering Rud's eating habits, things might not go very well. Rud then asked her what kind of city Iskia was. She explained that Iskia was the city of the Blue Sea, a lively place known for its fishing and trade. They had 2 reasons for going there. The first, she said, is to gain new abilities for you, Rud. The sunken temple, located near Iskia, is feared for its many monsters, all of which are completely different from the ones in Bologna. You'll be able to acquire many new skills there. The boss of that dungeon, the King of Scissors, possesses an incredibly powerful skill known as Iron Body. Rud asked if Iron Body was a stronger version of his hardening skill. Alicia replied that she remembered struggling greatly against that kind of toughness. Not even the attacks of high-ranking adventurers could penetrate that defense. The second reason, she continued, is to revive Del. That sunken dungeon is where Del was born, so we need to restore her as soon as possible. Besides, it'll make us stronger too. Rud asked if that spirit hadn't been devoured, but Alicia explained that spirits don't have physical forms. Even if they're damaged, they don't truly disappear. We'll restore her mana in the sunken dungeon and then recover her original power, she said. She added with a smile that Iskia was also famous for its delicious seafood. Then she asked, by the way, when we left Bologna, did August give you something? Rud pulled out a book and asked, you mean this? He asked what it was about, and Alicia told him it was a journal written by someone who had researched the practice of eating monsters, something that might prove very useful to him. Redout then remembered what Leonos had told him, that it was now his time to shine. He recalled the moments he had shared with that group of heroes before saying goodbye to them, the people he had admired so deeply. Alicia teased him, asking if he was planning to go on another adventure with Leonos and the others. Rud, flustered, asked what she was talking about. Laughing, she said, you're being way too suspicious right now. Rud sighed and asked Alicia to give him a little time. The scene then shifted once again to a terrified person sitting on the grass. In front of them, a man was being held by the neck by a monstrous creature. The man, gasping for air, shouted desperately for her to run away as fast as she could. But when she looked back and saw more monsters behind her. Demonic boars. The scene then cuts back to the book Rud was holding, titled Notes of the Count. It read, my research is forbidden, and I will record every method of cooking monsters here. Method for cooking a slime. Slimes are monsters commonly encountered by beginner adventurers, and can be subdued with relative ease. However, eating them is a completely different matter. Slimes contain a powerful acid within their bodies, so consuming them raw would dissolve your stomach and internal organs, potentially leading to death. Therefore, a process to neutralize the acid is necessary. Sauté the slime in a lye pot made from seaweed and leave it for 2 days until all the acid is neutralized. It can also be fried, but the oil splatters heavily and the meat shrinks significantly, causing a loss of flavor. The best way to prepare it is by stir-frying. Boil the slime in hot water until it changes color to a pinkish hue, but do not let it shrink. Then slice it into thin pieces. It is recommended to eat it with salad. Rud noted that the taste was slightly sweet, with a unique texture. When combined with the crispness of the salad, it creates an exceptional dining experience. Elysian remarked that Count Auguste's monster recipe book would be extremely useful to him. Rud replied that he could hardly believe such a record even existed, since eating monsters was considered taboo. Elysian commented that it was almost a miracle that this book had ended up in his hands. Then she had an idea. After completing their objectives in Iskia, why not visit this count? However, Rud said that wouldn't work and handed the book to Alicia. When she read it, her face turned pale in shock. She quickly closed the book and said it seemed that only Rud was capable of eating monsters. They continued their journey, and Alicia mentioned that once they crossed this forest they would reach Iskia. Rud was amazed by how incredible the forest looked. Alicia then asked if he had ever heard of the Calamity Dragon. Rudd replied that now that she mentioned it, he remembered hearing a story about it, a dragon so powerful that it was treated like a natural disaster, something humans could never resist, much like earthquakes or storms. He recalled that when he was a child, people used to scare him by saying the calamity dragon would come for him at night if he misbehaved. Alicia explained that this forest was famous for being the home of the calamity dragon. Startled, Rudd asked if it really existed and she confirmed it did. She said she had once seen the dragon from afar. Its appearance was divine, something no human could ever hope to surpass. Reed thought to himself that since he was born, there hadn't been any reports of the dragon appearing in the world. If Alicia had truly seen it, then she must be much older than she looked. She immediately noticed what he was thinking and scolded him, saying it wasn't polite to calculate someone's age. Just then Phaeton appeared, saying that there were 3 demonic boars ahead. Alicia stated there was no way around them, they'd have to defeat them to proceed. They launched their attack immediately. Alicia firing fireballs while Rudd appeared behind the beasts, slicing them cleanly in half with his sword. However, when they looked to the side they saw dead humans lying on the ground. The sight was gruesome. Ironically, it came from the same man who had just split 3 demonic boars as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Alicia commented that strange anomalies were occurring in the dungeons, and that Rudd was their natural predator. Now that the calamity dragon had disappeared, demonic boars were reproducing at an abnormal rate. Rudd said that leaving them like that would be dangerous, and since they happened to be passing through this area, there was only one thing to do. They had to deal with the demonic boars as quickly as possible. Using his heat vision, Rudd located the herd around 40 to 50 in total. Alicia said their threat level was low, but they were clever and always moved in groups so they couldn't lower their guard. Their position was perfect to avoid a large-scale battle, and according to standard tactics, they should reduce the numbers all at once. Rudd activated his paralyzing breath, attempting to freeze all the demonic boars simultaneously, but then he realized it hadn't worked. He remembered Leonos once saying that many monsters had resistance to specific status effects. The others quickly administered anti-paralysis herbs, allowing everyone to return to normal. Alicia then noticed that the boars were gaining temporary resistance as well. Laughing at Rudd's failed attempt, she teased him, saying his paralyzing breath didn't work. Annoyed, Rudd told her he got the point and to shut up. At that moment, all the demonic boars charged straight toward Rudd. He said he was going to turn them all into pork ribs. The battle began, and Alicia asked if she should wipe them out with her magic. However, Reed told her not to, since he wanted to test something. He then activated only his poisonous scales, saying that if he fought like that he might have an advantage. Ace immediately covered her nose, saying that if he got too close she would be affected as well. Rudd charged at the boars, shouting, "If paralysis didn't work, what do you say about poison?" He began cutting down the demonic boars, telling them they could all come at him at once. With each movement, the poisonous scales spread to the monsters within his range. He noticed that the scales' effect worked, but one of the monsters still alive attacked him from behind. Rudd quickly dodged the attack, but the boar then activated its command ability, rallying the others. Rudd realized he should have taken that one out first. Alicia shouted for him to be careful and look up. When he looked, he saw a massive boulder falling straight toward him. He managed to dodge it but wondered where it had come from. Then he noticed a strange, different-looking boar nearby and muttered, "What the hell is that?" S explained that it was a demonic boar king, a monster that usually lived deep within dungeons. It shouldn't even appear on the surface. Perhaps it was due to the influence of the calamity dragon, which might have increased the local concentration of magic. Either way, they couldn't let it wander freely as the damage would only grow worse. Rudd decided there was no time to think and began attacking again, saying they could discuss it later. First, they needed to defeat the Boar King. He said he had no time to waste on the others, told them all to die quickly, and sliced through the remaining boars. The Boar King launched another boulder at Rudd, but with his instant movement, Rudd dodged it easily. He tried to strike the Boar King, but the creature blocked his attack. Suddenly, all the other boars surrounded him. Rudd smirked and said that when the leader was threatened, the minions gathered, which was perfect since he could take them all down at once. He let out a roar and released part of his power, knocking down several of the minions. Then he activated a Miasma status effect that spread through the area, terrifying the Boar King. Rudd said it was his turn now. At that moment, he remembered Leonais's teachings, to feel the sensation of wrapping his body with mana. Following that advice, he managed to block the Boar King's powerful attack with just one hand. Rudd thanked Leonais for the lesson, then sliced the Boar King in half effortlessly, saying that Leonais had made him much stronger. Alicia was amazed that Rude managed to kill the Boar King with a single strike. She asked about the earlier ability, wondering if it had been the Miasma wave. Rude confirmed it was, explaining that he had obtained it from the Miasma dragon, and that it was an extremely powerful ability. However, he mentioned it had one flaw. When she asked what it was, he replied that it made him very hungry. The scene then shifted. Rude had already prepared another monster dish. Elisa commented that once again he had made something incredibly delicious. Rude said he used the notes from the Count's book to season and prepare the meat, and he couldn't wait to taste it. Suddenly someone appeared, saying it smelled amazing. Rude was shocked. It was the same adventurer girl from before. She asked if she could join them, calling Rude Mr. Monster-Eating Adventurer. Rude asked what she was doing there, and she replied that she liked him so much that she decided to follow him. She said that back in Abalio, she had seen him cooking monsters and had been craving a taste ever since. Without hesitation, she picked up a piece of monster meat and ate it. Rid and Alicia were horrified, unable to believe what she had just done. Ice panicked and said they needed to make her vomit immediately. Rid grabbed her and told Alicia to stick her fingers in the girl's mouth to make her throw up. The girl, confused, asked what was happening. Alicia, trembling, said it was because she had eaten monster meat, and if she swallowed it she would surely die. However, the girl calmly replied that she would be fine. Red, desperate, shouted that there was no way that could be true. Alicia said they were doing this for her own good, but the girl grew irritated and threw both of them far away. She angrily said, "Honestly, how dare you touch my body like that?" Rudda was stunned, wondering what had just happened. The girl complained that she hadn't even been able to enjoy her meal properly because of them, then continued eating the monster meat. As she did, she began acting strangely, which left Rude and Alicia both deeply alarmed. Alicia was extremely worried about what was happening. She wondered if that crazy girl was turning into a monster, and Rude said he would try to use substitution on her as quickly as possible. However, out of nowhere the girl suddenly shouted that it was the most delicious thing she had ever eaten. Alwys and Rude were completely confused, not understanding what was going on at all. Alicia asked the girl what was happening, while Rude said he still couldn't sense any mana coming from the ingredients. Alicia then said that, apparently the girl seemed to be completely fine. Hearing that, Alicia started to get a craving to eat some too, but the girl told her that, even if it wasn't selfish of her, she couldn't eat monsters, and asked Rude if he knew what happened when humans ate monster meat. Alicia then asked why she was eating it, and the girl replied, "I said humans can't eat monsters, but for a monster like me, it's perfectly normal." Rudd was shocked and asked, "What do you mean a monster?" The girl nodded and said, "Yes, I'm not human." Rudd immediately activated his analysis ability to check her identity. The results showed her name was Lemira, and that she was of the human race. Confused, Rudd told her that his analysis showed she was human. Lemira apologized, saying she had forgotten to undo her disguise, and asked him to analyze her again. When Rudd did, he was stunned, taking a step back and shouting for Elisa to move away from her immediately. A frightened Elisa asked what was wrong, and Rude said, trembling, "That thing is the Calamity Dragon." The system revealed her true identity, Lemira, the Calamity Dragon, race monster. Alicia was terrified, saying it couldn't be true. Lemira, unfazed, simply commented that the pork ribs were fantastic, even more delicious than any monster she had ever eaten before. Regaining his composure, asked what her goal was. Lemira smiled and told him to relax. She wasn't planning to eat him or anything like that. Alicia then asked why a being of such a high rank would disguise herself as a human. Lemira replied that she didn't have any special reason. She had simply become curious about Rude's mana, so she decided to approach him. To her surprise, he turned out to be a monster eater, and she was captivated by the food he was cooking. Because of that, she couldn't resist following him. Rudd and Alicia were both speechless. Lemira then mentioned that there was a den of demonic boars nearby and that once she left the forest, they started overbreeding, something she found rather disgusting. Still, she kept praising the flavor of the meat, saying it was especially tasty and probably from a demonic boar. She explained that the higher a monster's level, the denser its magic and the better its flavor. Rudd thought she was basically a monster gourmet. Lemira then suggested that they should hunt the boss of the demonic boar den so Rudd could prepare another fine monster dish. Seeing no other option, Rudd agreed. Alicia, however, couldn't stop thinking about how Lemira had eaten all that monster meat so easily. Lemira smiled and said it was settled. They just needed to wait for her a bit, but Alicia asked Lemira to take them with her, saying that even though Lemira didn't seem to be lying, she wanted to watch her fight, since they needed to get stronger quickly. Lemira laughed, finding that interesting, and agreed to let them come along. On the way, Reed mentioned that she seemed more relaxed now. Lemira replied that since she had already revealed her true identity, there was no point in pretending anymore. She told them they were almost there. They soon arrived before a large door, and Lemira said she wanted to show them something, the reason she was called the Calamity Dragon. Rudd asked what she meant, and Alicia, looking around, said she had never seen this dungeon before and doubted even the guild knew about it. Lemira said the source of the stench in her territory seemed to be coming from there, but she didn't want to use too much mana yet. When she opened the door, they saw what looked like a treasure vault filled with monster ingredients. Alicia noted that the number of monsters inside seemed normal, and Rude offered to help Lemira, but she smiled and said there was no need. She told Reed that he would cook later to help her restore the mana she would use there. At that moment, Lemira transformed into a half-dragon, and just her presence was enough to make the demonic boars collapse in fear. Lemira said that since she had enjoyed such a delicious meal today, she would make an exception, then activated her destructive breath ability. The attack was so powerful that it obliterated everything within the dungeon, annihilating everything in its path. Both Alicia and Rudd were left speechless, unable to believe the sheer destructive power she possessed. Lemira then said with a smirk that it had been a long time since she had released such a devastating blast. She then told Rude that it was time for them to prepare some demonic boar king ribs. Rudd asked her to wait a moment since, even if he wanted to cook, she had completely turned the creature's body into ashes. Lemira grew visibly frustrated, saying it had been a long time since she had lost control like that. Suddenly, however, she caught a scent and told them to cheer up. The boss was still alive and located on the floor below. She urged them to move quickly. As they descended, they found a massive door in front of them. Lemira said it looked like the entrance to the boss chamber. Without hesitation, she kicked the door open, and they came face to face with the demonic boar emperor. Lemira remarked that it was a beautiful piece of ingredient material. She added that to preserve the quality of the ingredient, she would take it easy this time. She explained that Rhodes' mana control was still quite amateurish and told him to pay close attention. This was how one properly infused mana in combat. The demonic boar emperor charged toward her, and Rude shouted for her to be careful, but Lemira swiftly landed a powerful punch right to the boar's face, stunning Rude with her strength. She said that one more hit should finish the job and then kicked the creature in the stomach, sending it flying across the chamber. Rude and Alicia were amazed by her sheer power, and Lemira told Rude that it was time to prepare their meal. The scene then shifted. Rude had cooked demonic boar emperor steaks and ribs. Lemira was already excited, saying she had been looking forward to this moment for a long time. When she tasted the food, she said it was absolutely delicious. She could feel the mana returning to her body, and her absorption efficiency was even better than when eating the meat raw. Rudd asked if it was really that good, and Lemira replied that an amateur like him wouldn't understand yet. He still had a lot of training to do before he could truly grasp what she meant. Alicia looked frustrated, since she was the only one who couldn't eat monster meat. Then Lemira asked Rude why he didn't join her. Alicia, alarmed, asked what she meant by that. Lemira said that if Rude became her personal chef, she would teach him how to control his mana properly. Rude admitted that it was a tempting offer, but it was all too sudden for him to decide. Lyra then mentioned that she could smell the wise dragon's scent coming from his backpack. She said he was so afraid of the side effects that he hadn't even eaten it yet, and that it was a waste not to consume such an incredible species. Rude was surprised that she had noticed, and Lyra asked if he remembered what happened to his body during that battle. Rude nodded and said that to recover mana, he had eaten the wise dragon's egg and felt an overwhelming surge of energy coursing through his body, so intense that for a moment he had stopped feeling like himself. Lumira confirmed that was exactly the issue. His body had failed to completely adapt to that overwhelming mana. She also noted that it was strange because with his status nullification ability, such a thing should have been impossible. She then suggested that he try cooking and eating that dragon meat again. If he lost control, she would be able to suppress him. Whether or not he could absorb the full power would depend entirely on him. Rhoda hesitated, wondering if he should take such a risk, but before he could even think it through, he had already grilled the wise dragon meat. Lumira commented that it looked delicious. Rhoda agreed, but asked if she was sure it was edible, and how they could know it wouldn't turn out like last time. Lumira told him to just relax. She explained that mana, like magic for humans, was something rooted in a monster's body. When a human absorbed mana, their body rejected it because it wasn't designed for that, which was when either mutation or death occurred. However, Lumira revealed that Rud's abilities suppressed both outcomes. To be precise, she had modified his body, nullifying only the mutations that would cause him to lose his humanity, while allowing beneficial mutations that helped him adapt to mana. She told him that his body was still evolving, and in its current state, it still wasn't fully capable of absorbing all that power. Lumira then asked if he had felt something similar the first time he ate monster meat. Red replied that yes, the first time he had eaten it, he had completely lost his sanity. Alicia said that Rode simply couldn't handle such an overwhelming amount of mana yet. If he kept leveling up, eating more monsters and raising his stats, he might eventually be able to adapt completely, though there was no telling when that would happen. Lyra nodded and said there was another way. Since his body couldn't handle it yet, he could compensate with technique. She explained that this technique was similar to the mana manipulation he had learned, and maybe he already had the foundation for it. Lumira then said that all that remained was for him to learn how to control the mana that was exceeding his body's capacity. She told him that she would help him with the process, and the two of them joined hands. Lumira instructed him to first release the mana from his body, and then surround himself with the energy he had released. Rid said that the power was incredible and completely different from before, but at that moment his body couldn't handle it. He let go of Lumira's hand and she told him to always remember that feeling running through his body. This meal would serve as good training for him as well. Alicia thought that the technique was amazing, unlike anything any human she had ever met could do. Lumira then told everyone to stop talking because she wanted to eat. Disappointed, Alicia asked if she was going to eat too, and Lumira replied that of course she was. That was exactly why she was there. Rudd was still a little uneasy, but he said he would eat as well. The two then began eating the wise dragon's meat. Lumira said that it was very good. It was funny, considering that she was of the dragon race but was also eating a dragon, but oh well, that could be ignored. Lumira commented that, as expected from a true dragon, even though it was only a newborn, the quality of its mana was extremely strong and rare. She wondered if Rude would be able to withstand it. Rude thought it was incredible. He could feel a surge of power building inside him. Lumira asked if he thought he was going to lose control, but he said that, for now, he was managing to stay in control and he believed he had successfully absorbed the abilities as well. He then gained the abilities Telekinesis, Divine Annihilation Strike, Paralysis Resistance, and Earth Divider. But not only that, he also acquired the Eye of Wisdom. However, at that moment Rude clutched his head in pain, wondering what was happening to him and why thousands of images were flooding into his mind. He questioned whether he was hallucinating, but that couldn't be the case. His status nullification would have activated if it were. He tried to understand what those images were, but then the wise dragon appeared, saying that Rude was a filthy human and that he would not allow a human to use his eye. The dragon shattered the Eye of Wisdom, causing Rude to lose that ability. Alicia asked if he was okay, and Rude said yes, but it seemed that he had failed to acquire one of the abilities. Lemira commented that even he couldn't handle it. She explained that the Eye of Wisdom was a unique skill belonging solely to that dragon, one that allowed the user to copy abilities just by seeing them and even glimpse into the future. She said she had thought Rude might withstand the power, but clearly even he couldn't handle interference from a pure dragon. Still, she told him to relax. Failing to acquire an ability wasn't a negative thing. Rudd complained that she could have at least warned him beforehand, but Lemira brushed it off, saying that what really mattered now was whether he had decided to join her. She said that if he agreed to let her join his team, she would teach him how to control his mana properly. Before answering, Rude was still confused by the visions he had seen earlier. He was trying to figure out whether they were memories of the past or glimpses of the future. It was then revealed that even if one's body perished, wisdom accumulated in the soul, and that this wisdom held the power to even reveal the future. Rude then told Lemira that he would form a team with her if he wanted to become stronger. He needed her power, and that power would also greatly help Alicia. Alicia agreed, saying that to achieve their goals, this was the right choice. She supported Rude's decision. Lemira, delighted, said it was settled, and the two of them clasped hands. However, Alicia warned Lemira that she wouldn't forgive her if she did anything suspicious. Lemira laughed and asked why elves were always so distrustful. Back on the road, Alyssa said she could already see their destination ahead, and Rude was impressed by the view. Finally, they arrived at the port city of Iskia. Rude said it was his first time there and noticed that the city was bustling and prosperous. Alyssa explained that since it was located near the sea, trade there was booming, making it a lively place. Rudd suggested they go straight to the guild to take on the submerged dungeon mission, but Alicia advised against it. She explained that foreign adventurers had to start with simple missions first to earn the guild's recognition. Besides, with their current strength, it would be difficult to conquer the submerged dungeon. The scene then shifted to the Adventurers Guild of Iskia City. Alicia pointed out that the quests there were beginner level and that one of them looked like the perfect starting mission for Rude. At that moment, two guys then showed up, asking if they were newcomers. They said it looked like a low-level weak group. They glanced at Lemira and asked who that little girl was, saying that going on an adventure wasn't child's play. They mocked her, saying that if she came to play, she should just go back home. It would be much safer for her to play with her mommy and daddy. At that moment, another man stepped in and told them to stop. He apologized on behalf of his teammates, saying they were always rude. The rude men then called this blonde guy Alan and sarcastically asked who said he was their leader. Alan replied that if they intended to tarnish the name of the White Wave Blades, he'd have to deal with them himself. One of the men pulled out a knife, asking Alan if he wanted to try his luck, but another teammate stopped him, saying he was causing a scene in front of everyone and that their boss wouldn't be happy about it. The first man scoffed, calling him a buzzkill, and said they'd leave, but not before sneering that weaklings like him were only good for monster bait. Lemira then asked Rude if she could roast them and eat them, but Rude told her to relax. Alan bowed deeply, apologizing once again on their behalf, saying they were really difficult people to deal with. Rude told him it was fine. There were rude adventurers everywhere in the world. Alan asked if they were new in town, and Rude said yes, since they had just arrived. Alan introduced himself as a member of the White Wave Blades and welcomed them to the city of Iskia. Rude introduced himself as well. Alan then noticed the paper in Alicia's hand, and was surprised to see it was a quest for Blue Shark Subjugation. Alicia confirmed it, explaining that since they had just arrived in the city, they thought it would be a good place to start. Alan nodded and said he understood. The quest wasn't particularly difficult, but since it was located in the ocean, they'd need a boat. Alicia agreed and asked if they should rent one. Alan offered to lend them his boat instead, saying it was the least he could do to make up for his teammates' rudeness. He even offered to accompany them, explaining that sea missions could be tricky if they weren't used to them. However, Lemira declined, saying they didn't need help. Alan said that was fine. He only wanted to apologize for his group's behavior. He added that it was important to form parties with people you could truly trust to guard your back. Then he said he'd prepare the boat at the port and wished them safe travels, hoping the ocean spirits would bless their journey in return. And honestly, this guy was giving off serious Bayern Group vibes. You know, that group from the start of the story that betrayed the protagonist. But anyway, let's move on. The scene then shifted to Rude, Alicia, and Lemira already aboard a boat sailing at sea. Alicia commented that they were lucky to get a boat so easily, while Rude said that Alan had been really kind to them. Lemira, however, wasn't pleased at all, saying the boat was cheap and mediocre. Annoyed, Alicia told her to stop complaining and said they should already be nearing the hunting grounds. Then Alicia asked Rude if she could talk to him for a moment. She activated her blessing of the water spirit of Erndel, but when she tried to cast it on Rude, she realized it hadn't worked, just as she expected. Rude's status nullification prevented the effect. Alicia explained that when facing aquatic monsters, they usually used magic to breathe underwater. Rude said it was fine if that didn't work on him since he had an ability called high-speed swim. He jumped into the water telling the two to wait there since it was a low-rank mission. He'd be back soon. Lemira remarked that Rude was a really interesting guy. Underwater, Rude swam deeper with a rope tied around his waist. He quickly located the blue shark of the earth, whose abilities were water bullet, current surge, amphibious, and pressure resistance. Rude wondered how he should cook shark. Should he make sashimi or fry it? Then he decided, saying he'd prepare it à la manière. The sharks detected Rude and rushed toward him. Meanwhile, above the surface, Lemira wondered if Rude would be alright, though she noted that the monster didn't seem too dangerous. Alicia explained that if something went wrong, Rude would send a signal through the rope and they'd just have to pull him back up, but she was sure this mission would be easy for him. At that moment, Lemira noticed something floating in the water and was shocked. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was a water horse, an incredibly rare creature. She realized that it had already spotted them, and that its ability to swim through water so gracefully could be very useful. Alicia agreed, saying they needed to capture it as quickly as possible. At that point, the water horse,